Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei. Back with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Deku Fought for Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There are 3 things all wise men fear: the sea and storm, a night with no moon, and the anger of a gentle man. Me, I've got a different problem. I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone. Ever since I came to Remnant, I've been holding back, never allowing myself to truly lose control even for a moment, or someone could die. But you can take it, can't you, big girl? You said it yourself. You're beyond a huntress. You're the spring maiden. What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am. Now then, clench. You're an angry Shinobi. Rolling thunder, this world really had a bone to pick with him, didn't it? It was the only explanation that made a LCK of sense to Naruto anymore. No matter what he tried, regardless of what he said or did, he seemed fated to stumble from one disaster to another without end. He hadn't even been in Remnant for a month yet, and already, he felt like he was losing his mind. For all his effort at being a peaceful man, reality wanted to roll right over him. As such, the very moment, the very instant Naruto tumbled out of Raven's portal, so too did he lash out at the first thing he saw. Be a good boy and stay put for a bit, her voice chased after him through the nebulous tether. I'll join you shortly. Rarg. He swung around just in time to see the gateway gutter out behind him, leaving him trapped in, well, wherever the hell this was. A tent. This looked like a tent. He barely saw it, didn't care for the opulent fabrics or shiny trinkets sprawled around the room. Blue eyes narrowed to hooded slits and a golden limb thundered down, blindly smashing the first thing within reach. A wooden table splintered beneath his fist, shattered like so much kindling. Unfortunately, so did the lamp placed upon it. Fire flickered out and he stomped it down just as angrily. Calm down. Ironically, it was Kurama who proved the voice of reason. We'll get her back. You don't know that. His very voice shook the earth. She could be anywhere by now. It's my fault. If I hadn't. Stop throwing a tantrum and think for a moment. A jarring headache snapped his head to the side before he could storm out of the tent and do something reckless. We were caught off guard. I didn't think she'd go after Amber, and neither did you. Are you going to let it happen again? Of course not. There you have it then. In his mind's eye, Naruto saw his partner roll over and exhaled a thin cloud of steam. When that woman reappears, and something tells me she will soon, we'll deal with her. But it was my fault. If I hadn't goofed around even now. He cursed himself for his own mistakes, knowing there was no one else to blame but himself. He'd been the one to open the window, made the mistake of letting Raven in. Everything had snowed from there and it was all his fault. His and his alone. She probably had Amber at her mercy even now. What else could he do? Blitzed her. He might have reached Amber in time, or he might have seen her die. His mark allowed him to heal many things, but there was no bringing someone back from a beheading. His ego wasn't so large as to believe he could do that. And he wasn't willing to risk her life for foolish pride. You're not infallible. The next retort cooled his heels. That's what makes you human. Aren't you angry? Naruto asked. Of course I'm angry. A low growl pushed itself through the fox's jaws. I'm just better at hiding than you. And well, the sudden hesitation put a dent in Naruto's anger, enough to give him pause. What's this now? I'd rather not see your maiden come to harm. That's all. Wait. My maiden? Naruto blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Realization broke like the dawn and a loud guffaw burst from his lips. Wow. He cried, jabbing a finger at him. You're sweet on her. That has nothing to do with it. She's simply more tolerable than the Schnee. Laughing helped because his partner's discomfort gave him something to focus on beside the rage. Naruto blew out a trembling breath through clenched teeth and willed himself to uncurl his fists. Deep, primal anger seethed just below the surface of his skin, a seething vat of fury that he only narrowly managed to slam a lid on. He knew, of course. They both knew there was nothing they could have done. Raven had them by the S4 now. They'd just have turned the tables. And they would. They'd overcome worse odds than this before. Thanks. He sighed, wiping a mirthful tear from his eye. I think I needed that. Still gonna kick that bird's butt though. Demonstrate we will. For a sliver of a second he caught a flash of teeth in his mind's eye. Just you wait. She'll never see it coming. It really was one thing after another, wasn't it? First came that bloody debacle with Amber assassins. Then Crow provoked him into a fight, followed soon thereafter by Winter's tantrum. Now along came a new danger, and he didn't even know her name. He knew next to nothing about her at all, save that she was Crow's sister. She certainly acted like a Branwen, crashing into his life and throwing everything into disarray without so much as a care in the world. Was it so wrong to want a moment's rest? Apparently so. Damn it. No anger. Just calm down. With his emotions mastered once more, Naruto exhaled in a put-upon sigh and took a step back to survey his surroundings. He really was in a tent of some sort, excluding the heavy fabrics and blankets. There was nearly no light in here at all now that he'd smashed the lamp. Even now he could see that faintest ray of sunlight peeking through the flap, hinting at the world beyond. Kurama fell curiously silent in his head, leaving him with no other recourse but to venture forth. Well, he muttered, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Gritting his teeth, he stalked out of the tent, peeled the flap back and emerged into daylight. Blue eyes squinted at the camp that lay beyond, if one could call it such. By his reckoning it was little more than a ramshackle dwelling, all things considered. An open enclosure surrounded by a wooden palisade consisting and a single gate. The people here looked rough, and their homes rougher still, though the shoddily built huts and leaning tents suggested a lifestyle favoring quantity over quality. Speaking of tents, he just stepped out of the biggest of the bunch. Wow. Had that been the end of it, he might yet have escaped without drawing any attention to himself. It wasn't meant to be. You see, the very moment Naruto set foot outside her tent, a series of harsh CLCKs reached his ears. He looked up, knowing at once what he would find there and not any happier for it. A wall of bodies greeted him, easily 24 strong if not more. Also not a problem. Nor were the weapons in their hands. "Move, you dolts!" An unfamiliar voice cried somewhere near the back of the crowd. "Let me through." A young girl with piercing blue eyes and dirty brown hair elbowed her way through the mob of miscreants to regard him intently, heedless of their difference in stature. Never mind the fact that she had to look up at him, she still conveyed her sheer presence through silence alone. Clad in ragged leathers as she was, and with little more than a knife at her side, she didn't seem like she would be in charge of such a motley crew. Yet they heeded her words all the same and made way for her. "That's him," she stabbed a finger at him. "He's the one Raven told us to expect. Take him." Ah, there it was. A name to go with the face. Naruto bit back a sigh as his blue eyes blazed red. Still he held his ground. "You got a name, kiddo? Vernal?" The youngster snorted back and crossed both arms before her chest. "Not that it matters to you, dipsit." His mouth twitched into the barest beginnings of a smile. "Language. Piss off," she raised a lone finger in salute. "You're not my dad. And on that note," he shook his head, "I don't think I'll be going with any of you. We're the Branwen tribe," one of them crowed, "most feared bandits in Mistral. Don't mess with us." Naruto perked up. In hindsight, perhaps that one should have kept his mouth shut. Until now, he hadn't quite considered them criminals. Bandits. Now that he turned his senses outward, he could feel their emotions. Some were little more than common thugs, others were worse. They washed over him in an ugly wave of filth, staining his very soul. Liars and thieves. Murderers and rapists. Unclean. Scum. Filth. These people, their leader, had threatened him. Naruto didn't mind that. He was used to threats. He'd grown inured to them over the years. But they tried to hurt Amber, that poor innocent girl who wanted nothing more than a normal life. And that was unforgivable. A slow smile spread across Naruto's face. "Bandits, you say?" Kurama mirrored the expression. Well. That simplifies thing, doesn't it? Let's see them report to their MSTR if they're out cold. "Put him a cell," Vernal ordered, utterly unaware of the dialogue taking place. "He can cool his heels there until Raven gets back." It was the final nail in the tribe's coffin. Naruto didn't snap. Snapping implied losing oneself to a mindless frothing rage, going berserk with anger. His was colder. A quiet, glacial fury, a supernatural calm that settled over him even as the BLD in his veins turned to so much ice. There was no need for sage mode here, much less Kurama's aid. His fists would be more than enough for what he had planned. Raven wanted to try and take someone from him, fine. He'd steal everything from her in return. Thus smiling, he raised his hands as two men stepped forward to bring him in. Naruto's hesitation had already cost him dearly once. No longer. FCK fate and DMN destiny. He refused to let himself be pushed around any longer. These people were thugs and criminals. Criminals respected two things: strength and fear. Fine. Just this once he'd show them fear. Fear was all he felt right now, fear for himself, fear for Amber's life. Given his present situation, he was something of a savant when it came that emotion. Fear drove him to make a reckless decision indeed. Strong arms took hold of his shoulders for a moment. Only a moment. Then the air absolutely ignited. Get. With a FLCK of his wrist and a roar of rage, the blonde wrenched his right arm free and swung it backwards in a blistering backhand. His reward was a man's strangled grunt, one that became a piercing scream as the blonde dug his fingers in, grabbed him by the face and pulled. BLD splashed across his sleeve and he summarily ignored it as he tore his left hand loose and smashed it against the nose of his second captor. This time there could be no mistaking the awful hideous crunch of crushed cartilage and broken bone as the poor sod crumpled to the ground. Every weapon in the camp trained itself on him at once. Good. Just as he'd planned. Do I have your attention now? Naruto tilted his head with a hum, heedless of the BLD on his face. Credit where it was due, Vernal realized what was about to happen next. She just wasn't fast enough to prevent it. No, you idiots. She raised an arm, trying to stop them from unleashing further chaos in the camp. Don't shoot. He'll escape. They shot. Naruto could have taken that moment to run, fled away over the barrier and into the woods. No one would have caught him. But he didn't want to escape. Instead he chose to stand his ground. Dust rounds pinged harmlessly off his chest and shoulders, Kurama's golden cloak as the fox howled to life around him, and with a wave of his hands, he directed his chakra back and outward. Countless golden arms burst from his body like a torrent of angry snakes, seizing and crushing everything in reach, all within sight. Bone, flesh, metal. Everything yielded to him. Men and women dropped like flies, screaming and howling. He didn't even deign to face the rest. He simply inhaled, chest swelling with air. Vernal dove for cover just as he breathed out. Chakra is a potent thing, the chakra of a tailed beast even more so. The sheer force behind his roar slammed the stragglers into one another and sent them sprawling, dashing them against each other. A second scream brought half the wall down. A third ripped the gate from its hinges, launching it down the road like a leaf on the wind. One of the survivors rushed him through the smoke with a roar, waving a machete. Naruto mule kicked the BSTRD through what remained of the palisade, creating a shower of wood and bloody splinters. That one didn't get back up. How odd. He didn't feel any guilt for his death. Why had he been afraid of hurting people like this at all? It felt freeing. Liberating. Scum deserved to die, didn't they? Was that the anger talking that left the runt from before, quivering at his feet? Now that he looked at her, Vernal really was just a kid. One who might have been forced to grow up faster than she would have liked, but a child nonetheless. She couldn't be more than 14. 15 at the most. She looked absolutely terrified. Of course she was. He dismantled most of the camp in 30 seconds. Still, something in him hesitated and he lowered his arm. Don't worry. I'm not gonna hit a kid. I'm no kid. The urchin growled back at him. I'm a proud member of this tribe. Whatever you say. Look, just stay there and you won't be hurt. A sixth sense shrieked a warning the moment he turned his back on her. Even then he was, die. Naruto willed his body to pulse gold for the merest of moments and the crude knife shattered into countless shards on his shoulder. With nowhere else to go but up, the shrapnel slashed into the poor girl's palm with brutal intensity. Vernal cried out in surprise and stumbled back, clutching her bloodied hand. Wide eyes balked at him, the ruined hilt she clutched, her own BLD, and back again. What the hell are you? Are you done? Naruto frowned. You should probably get that looked at. Fine. Her shoulders slumped in defeat and she hung her head. I see how it is. If you're gonna kill me, be quick about it. What the actual hell? Now it was Kurama's turn to balk. You can't be serious. Just what kind of environment was she raised in? Kill you? Naruto seconded the sentiment with a scowl of his own. Why would I do that? The strong kill the weak. Icy blue eyes gazed up into his own. That's the way of the world. Raven will avenge me. Somehow I doubt that. Raven didn't strike him as the sort to care for anyone but herself. Perhaps she did. He doubted it. Vernal sniffled. What, you scared, huh? Then you're weak. Just like Naruto sent her sprawling with a single roundhouse kick. She never saw his boot fly into her face until it was too late, barely even felt the pain, such was its intensity. Her world went white. By Naruto's standards it was a weak attack on his part. He could have snapped her neck if he hadn't held back at the last second. Unfortunately, this left the crazed girl conscious. Dazed and angry but still very much awake. Now why did you have to do that? He blew out an angry breath. You can't hurt me. Stay down. Don't make me knock you out. She leaped onto his back the moment he turned away. He ripped her free and tried to depart, only for her to grab his ankle. Imnit done, don't ignore her. Kurama cautioned. That's a good way to get another knife in your spine. Then what do you suggest I do? He hissed back. Scare her. Put the kid to bed. Fine. You know what, you're right. Steeling himself, Naruto looked over her and cut a grin, teeth flashing in the gloom. "Ya ain't the kid. You're a member of Raven's tribe." 2 steps carried him toward the startled girl, leaving him looming over her, casting her small body in his shadow. Credit where it was due, Vernal didn't buckle. "Which makes you a pig." Until he modulated his voice to sound very much like the beast he housed, then those knees began to tremble. "Pigs should be slaughtered." He leaned closer still, forehead pressing against hers, red eyes boring into blue. "Where should we start, little piggy? Your lungs, perhaps pancreas, so many places to stab, so little time." In the end it was too much for Vernal Bear. A single spike of killing intent finished the job and solidified his lie. With a wordless gurgle she toppled backward, foaming at the mouth. Naruto nimbly caught her and lowered her to the floor. Only then did he wince and scratch the back of his head. "Well, you were right. That did it." He didn't relish the idea of killing anyone, but he accepted the necessity of it. He wasn't above breaking a few bones. Or perhaps every bone in their bodies. Yeah, that sounded about right. Cracking his knuckles, he turned his attention to the remaining bandits. "You're going to die. I hope you realize that." Not half bad as far as last words went. Raven hadn't seen such resolve in a long, long time, least of all a look like that. She considered the girl she had at sword point. She did not weep, did not beg for mercy, nor did she tremble. Even as Omen's scarlet edge caressed the nape of her neck, her golden eyes gazed unfalteringly up at her, even as she informed her of her own imminent demise. She certainly had spunk, if nothing else. This girl would make putty out of little Vernal. There was a fire there, a grit her apprentice still lacked. Amber had seen death, danced with the devil in the pale moonlight, and come out stronger for it. Oh, there was fear in her eyes, to be sure, fear of her death and all that it entailed. But despite that fear, she stayed strong. "You think you can kill me?" she scoffed. "You're too green." "Not me." Those burning golden orbs narrowed upon her. "Naruto, he won't let you get away with this." "Huh." A sharp, disbelieving guffaw burst from the older woman. "That kid, he's not a killer. Not yet, at any rate." "Naruto's not like that." "Is he now?" Raven seeked her head and granted her a cruel smile. "I watched him bat my baby brother around like a schoolyard bully. He dismantled the Shnee in even less time. He's strong. He just needs a little push to have the right mindset." The girl tried to surge up, but Omen tightened against her throat. It. Don't move just yet. It would be a shame to get BLD on the carpet." "You're right." Amber agreed wholeheartedly, suddenly surprising her. "Naruto wouldn't kill a good person. But you," her smile stuck with her, small and secretive, and it planted a seed of doubt in Raven's heart. "Look at what you've done. You took me hostage, kicked him through a portal leading to God's snowshire, and left my fate hanging over him like a guillotine. Who knows?" Slim shoulders rose in a stiff shrug as her captor began to glower at her. "He probably thinks you're torturing me even now." With each word her voice rose, ire growing, heat building. "How you think he's going to take that?" She paused, letting the words sink in and take root. "I've seen him fight too, you know." The words dipped suddenly, become a furious whisper. "You didn't see that one. I don't know what edge you think you have, but it won't be enough. You have no chance." Pride roared back to life in Raven's heart and she furiously stamped it down, to no avail. "Maybe I should kill you then and be done with it." "You could." Ember shrugged. "I wouldn't be able to stop you. But it would be a bad death," Raven sneered. "That's what I thought. For you? Cheeky little sit." She thought herself safe, thought she was untouchable. She was right in a sense. Her life had value. "You're the spring maiden, aren't you?" Raven stiffened and nearly cut her throat right then and there. It was this very rigidity that betrayed her. "How? I'm more attuned to my powers than most." Amber retorted glibly. How could she be so calm with a sword at her throat? "Until now I suspected, but I wasn't sure. Atlas still has their maiden. Nobody gives a DMN about Vacuo. The only one that's been missing is Spring." She held up another finger, completing her calculation. "And you wouldn't be so confident about facing Naruto unless you had that kind of power? Meaning you either have a relic unlikely, or power similar to mine. Seems I was right." "Kill her." A nasty little voice hissed in Raven's ear. "She knows too much. You've ended one maiden before, why not another? What's stopping you? Because she was a coward?" Ember clearly wasn't. This was a strange feeling. She actually felt pride for someone else. Unfortunately, it was overshadowed by all this unyielding rage toward her captive. Omen's BLD red blade trembled for a moment, itching for action. Raven reluctantly drew it down a hair. "I'm not going to fight him," she answered finally. "Though I dare say I'd still win. I just want to speak with him. You were merely a means to an end." "Are you going to kill me or not, then?" Amber demanded. Temptation reared its ugly head once more. Perhaps I should. You annoy me. Was it possible to hold the power of multiple maidens? She already commanded the full might of spring. What would she be like if she added the power of fall to her own? She was tempted, no. But in the end she thought better of it. She'd already run the risk of pissing that thing off, and slaying his significant other would only enrage him further. Taking her captive would be even worse. She was certain that the boy would fly into a furious rage if she even attempted such a thing. Moreover, it would paint a big red target on her back. Salem would hunt her. Ashbin would hunt her. She'd have no peace. Ashbin she didn't fear, but Salem couldn't be killed. Salem would just keep coming, driving at her again and again until she broke. And make no mistake, she would break. You couldn't beat something like that. But with the girl alive, here in Beacon, Salem's attention would be focused on her for the foreseeable future. Onvala, Ember. Better the maiden she knew than the one she didn't. That served her purposes just fine. Amber had only ever been a temporary hostage at best, used once to get her message across, and then released all at once. The door swung open and such thoughts were swept away on the wind. Hey kiddo. Crow's head poked inside. Ashbin sent me to pick you up. His words trailed off as he saw them, rather, her blade against Amber's throat. Well, sit. Raven said less than eloquently. And the little beach grinned at her. Raven saw the smallest of smiles flit across Amber's visage for the merest of moments. Then the fall maiden turned a pleading expression and haunted eyes toward the younger Branwen. Raven knew what was about to happen and tried to clamp her free hand over the girl's mouth, but that only earned her brother's immediate ire. Really, she had no one to blame but herself for the events that transpired. Amber reared back and bit her with vicious force, bloodying her hand and causing her to recoil with a yelp. Of course, the little minx took that opportunity to dive out from under her and tumble to Crow's side. He only narrowly caught her, looking just as flummoxed as she felt. Uncle Crow, the fall maiden wailed through crocodile tears. Help! She's the spring maiden. She took Naruto and tried to kill me. Why? He sputtered. Was. Raven howled. Blast it. She wanted to cry. Today just wasn't her day. Amber twisted the emotional knife in her brother's gut and buried her face in his chest. No, she's lying. Don't let her kill me. Raven knew her brother well. Almost too well. She knew his tweaks, his tells, and what pissed him off. And what she just said, there was something about the words uncle and crow, when combined together with don't let her kill me, that set her sibling into a righteous fury. She witnessed the moment those words registered, saw his red eyes narrow upon her. Damn it. Amber's actions had conjured up a perfect storm and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Don't worry. Harbinger sailed free with a wordless hiss and his own words emerged as a growl. I won't. Nope. She wasn't about to fight her brother here. Not with little Miss Fall Maiden at her back. She couldn't kill her, but she couldn't let her go with that knowledge either. The optimal choice would be to kill her and Crow both, ensuring the information never left this room, but she couldn't kill them. Not while they presented a united front. This isn't over. Ran yanked her blade through the air, cut a portal to the right of herself and dove to safety. Was a good plan. Admirable even. Those who ran away lived to fight another day. Until her brother's blade slammed into her unprotected back and tore a chunk out of her aura and flesh alike. Pain blazed her vision red. Raven had time enough to gasp in pain as she tumbled through. Then she crashed through to what she prayed was safety. Everything was on fire. Raven realized her mistake the moment she'd emerged from her portal, realized she hadn't found safety at all, but the absence of it. Upon her less than triumphant return, the leader of the Branwen tribe was not greeted by her band of bandits, but by smoke and flame. In her absence she'd laid waste to her camp. What camp? Nearly the entire clearing had been leveled, sparing only her tent and a few bits of wood. The heaps of groaning bodies amidst the ruin did little to assuage her own concerns. Ruined. He'd ruined her tribe. It would take months to rebuild this, if not longer. Never mind recruiting. They'd be crippled for years because of this. She never saw his fist. Raven was still in the process of stepping out of her portal, of closing it, when a pair of clenched knuckles barreled into the side of her face and sent her body spinning into the dirt. Pain flared in her cheek, and when she tried to rise, a vicious kick cracked her ribs and her skipping across the camp like a flung stone. There you are, a rough, angry voice drawled somewhere behind her. You kept me waiting. Scrambling backward like a drunken crab, she struggled to right herself, and not a moment too soon. A tan fist slammed down into the space she just occupied, fracturing the earth. She had time enough to glimpse a blur of gold and black before she found her footing again. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Where's Amber? Of course. That would be the first thing he asked. Safe in her room, she snorted. Your girl made quite the mess for me. It was the wrong thing to say, judging by the way his eyes went slitted. Send me back. I will, she reassured, careful to keep her blade between them. Once I've said my piece. You're a fool to trust Ashbin. Yeah, sure. Ashbin bad. Naruto frowned back, dismissing her words out of turn. Don't trust him. Great. We done here or what, impudent little? Oh, she needed him. Raven willed her temper to be still and kept her tongue. Now is that any way for a guest to behave? I trust one person in this world. The blonde reared back, golden light beginning to splay across his body. And you're not her. I'll say it again. Return me to Vale. Or I'll find my way back. You kill me, you'll never get back there. She grinned back at him and wiped a thin line of BLD from her nose. How long will it take you to find your way? Days, weeks, you won't leave. You need me. Do I? He went terribly still. I'll take my chances. What? No. Wait. Naruto pounced on Raven and bloodied her nose before she could get her blade up in time. Behind her the portal guttered out harmlessly, leaving her target trapped. That should have been a relief. It was not. The next blow nearly broke her neck and knocked a tooth loose as her head snapped violently to the side. She caught the second and threw one of her own, earning a stunning headbutt for her troubles. She clawed at him and he grabbed her wrists, slamming her against one of the few standing structures in camp. Then and only then did she glimpse the visage of her so-called prey. Startled red eyes went wide as they met a pair of furious hooded slits not unlike her own, framed by an equally furious face. His fist shot up and came crashing down. I've blundered, she realized. She took the next punch on her chin and kicked out, launching him away with a gust of wind. It didn't last. He twisted his body in the air, caromed off one of the few remaining walls, and bounded back at her with a roar of absolute fury. Against her better judgment, Raven tried to stand her ground. It was like getting run over by a train. With her current wounds, it felt like a swarm of Nevermore had pecked her to pieces. So much for being inconspicuous. The cat was out of the bag anyway. Enough. She flung both arms out at her sides and took flight, summoning a storm with all the fury of the season she embodied. High above the blue sky darkened, black clouds swarming in faster than a plague of locusts. Lightning rippled through the heavens, bringing with it a bleak peal of thunder. It didn't drive Naruto back, but it did give him pause. A brief moment of respite that she used to catch her breath. She needed to stop. Needed to think, get control of the situation before it spiraled even further out of control. You're like Amber. Those keen red eyes rose to regard her. It wasn't a question but a damning statement. A muscle jumped in Raven's jaw. This is all your fault. You ruined everything. She flung a bolt of lighting at him and he batted it aside. What do you have to say for yourself? There are 3 things all wise men fear. She craned her ear to listen as he righted himself. The sea and storm, a night with no moon, and the anger of a gentle man. Me, I've got a different problem. The faintest whisper at her back as her only warning before a golden light struck her to the ground. I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone. Raven righted herself and took flight once more, only for another unseen blow to batter her through a tree and send her tumbling back to the earth. Ever since I came to Remnant, I've been holding back. Never allowing myself to truly lose control even for a moment or someone could die. But you can take it, can't you, big girl? A torrent of ice crashed down on the blonde's position, skewering him from head to toe, until his body went up in so much smoke. Raven hissed and conjured a fire to her palm, searching for him. Strong hands grabbed her hair and whipped her down into her tent like a falling star. She thrashed upright, tangled in the fabric, gave up and blasted it free with a rush of wind. She swung Omen at the first hint of light, straining for an edge to dig her blade into. Something. Anything. She succeeded, but not in the way she'd hoped. You're no mere huntress. Rather than dodge, Naruto caught her sword with his teeth, shattered it with a single bite, and slapped her right across the head with its ruined hilt. You're a maiden. He reeled her back in as she staggered away and launched her into another pile of burning debris with another kick. What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am. Now then. Even as she pried herself loose from the rubble, Naruto was upon her. His right fist swung back and snapped forward like a piston. Clench. Here. By some miracle Raven managed to get away from his next attack. The shockwave alone threatened to knock her out. That punch would have likely taken her head clean off. Are you running away now? He called up at her as she took flight once more. His words did nothing to dim the storm nor her fury. Her ruse was ruined. Her tribe in shambles. People would talk. Worse, she would have no way of keeping her secret now, much less leading the tribe after this. Salem would hunt her without relent. But didn't matter. She didn't care. What was once meant to be a simple dialogue had devolved into a bitter fight, one she intended to win. They were looking down on her, all of them always looking down on her. Merely the thought if made her blood boil. She just needed to beat him into the ground. Knock the defiance out of him. They could talk later. After she crushed him. Here in this moment, Raven Branwen felt only the thrill of her powers coursing through her veins and a burning need to blast someone to cinders. As Naruto was the only standing target for miles in any given direction, he was made it by default. He was the cause of her frustrations. She just wanted to talk, but no, he and his allies had made everything so bloody complicated. No more. Enough of this. It ends now. You are beneath me, the words tore out of her in a shriek, rising on keening winds as the clouds curled around her. I am the spring maiden, you dull creature. And I will not be bullied by the likes of Gak. Firm fingers closed around her right ankle as the blonde leaped up to meet her. Red eyes bulged in their sockets to meet savage scarlet. Oh. Raven choked the syllable out. Then her face became NTMT with the ground in a way no self-respecting huntress desired. Left, right, down, center. Naruto whipped her body back and forth into the earth with reckless abandon as though she were a doll of straw, caring not a whit for her cries of pain nor the treacherous creaking of her bones. Back and forth and back until finally Raven's battered aura could take no more. It gave way with a tortured squeal of sparks as her collarbone cracked and something gave way in her spine. There you go. And just like that, the blonde dropped her to the earth. Puny maiden. Raven tried to offer a retort, but managed only a tiny squeak of pain. Then she tumbled into the sweet release of slumber. Can't this thing go any faster? It's an airship, Firefly. Not a bloody dragon. What do you want me to do? If we get there and anything's happened to him, I'm blaming your semblance. He'll be alright. Kid's tough. No way he won't put up a fight. Not after the one he gave me, Crow. A drive. Faster. Amber and Crow. Poison words, oh happy day. What a lovely day to be alive indeed. What fortune. What joy. What stupendous luck they've been graced with. Well, fortunate for Tyrion Kalos. Not so the bandits. Unlucky bunch that lot. The faunus in question rubbed his hands together and stifled a giggle against the heel of one palm as he observed the smoldering camp before him. Well, this couldn't really be called a camp anymore now. It looked like a herd of angry Goliath had rampaged through the enclosure, rounded back, then stamped on the ashes for good measure. Tyrion knew better, for he'd been told the truth. This was the work of one man. Singular. Not plural by any means. Oh no. A fresh face in the never-ending war between Salem, his graceful goddess, and Ashbin the insufferable parasite who simply refused to die. This was someone new. Tail swaying gleefully beneath his coat, he crept through the brush and edged toward the treeline. He wanted nothing more than to cackle, but that would reveal himself. So he held it in and watched from afar, careful not to make himself known as he crept through the brush. Lionheart, ever the diligent coward, had been quick to inform her grace of the storm he'd seen. He'd called it a tempest unlike any other. A maiden had fought here. And lost by the look of it. Lost badly. And if he could secure them well, all the better. Surely Salem would be pleased with him. Tyrion's goddess saw everything. His goddess knew all. His goddess had ears throughout every kingdom. Lionheart was merely one of many. Salem had been most intrigued by Sweet Cinder's report already, yes. Most intrigued indeed. But such a display had drawn her focus more than any other. And so while poor Cinder languished in her failure and recovered from her injuries, Salem sent him to investigate them. Her most devoted of agents, her most faithful of followers. She wanted to meet this man, to have words with him, and so here he was. Eager to do her bidding, eager to see the aftermath for himself. It was glorious. Such appealing destruction. Such delicious carnage. Why, it almost made Tyrion want to sing. And he was quite the singer, he'd have you know. Framed in the fading light of the setting sun, the famed Branwen tribe was little more than a shadow of its former self. What had once been an imposing fortress had become a smoldering ruin lit by torches and guarded by a handful of survivors. He wondered if it would stay that way. Would they try to rebuild, or would they scatter to the winds like the weaklings they were some already had? He'd found one such survivor. They'd had a most pleasant chat, the two of them. Quite the talker, that one. What secrets he had sung. Grim would come soon, drawn in droves by the negativity. He was tempted to let them. But first, he wanted to see this man for himself. To bandy words with this creature who was clearly pretending to be someone something. He was not. Tyrion had glimpsed the truth in the bodies he'd left behind. Some of them had been flung for miles in every direction. He'd seen them all. Pulped and smashed and shredded and torn. That was fine work, yes, fine work indeed. This one knew his craft. He rather liked the cut of his jib. This man was a killer. Or he would be soon. He simply didn't realize it yet. Oh, but he would and then what fun would be had. Vernal knew the tribe's days were numbered. She dreaded it, feared it, and loathed it in equal measure. Looking back, the jig had been up the moment Naruto set foot in their camp. Vernal just hadn't realized it at the time. Now she did. Now she felt fear and distress because the tribe was all she'd ever known, all she'd ever been. But with its impending demise came the opportunity for change. What kind of change she knew not, but change was coming, of that much she was certain. Whether she liked it or not. She thought Raven was strong. Invincible. For a while there she had been. Raven was the spring maiden after all. That kind of power always seemed untouchable because of it. No one could stand against might and magic like that. Every challenger that dared to rise against her was snuffed out like a candle in the wind. But now Raven had been beaten. Badly. Not through tact, nor through cunning, but sheer strength. A small, hysterical giggle burst past her lips. Oh gods. She was terrified. Because now the tribe was restless, aimless, searching for direction where none was to be had. If things were left like this, if a leader wasn't chosen, they'd turn on one another soon. Some had already begun to do so. She gazed longingly at Raven's tent and waited for her to emerge, to take charge and forge order out of the chaos as she always did, but she never came. A small, tiny part of Vernal still held to hope, praying that Raven would come sauntering out with a smile on her face. The rest of her knew better. She'd seen those injuries. Raven would never walk again. And even if she did, she'd never be the same. Not after a beating like that. Many an hour had passed since Naruto dragged the boss's broken body inside and closed the flap behind him. He'd yet to return. Their brawl, short-lived though it was, had begun in the morning. Now it was nearly night and there was still no sign of either of them. In the silence that followed, the young bandit was left with her own thoughts. They soon proved stifling. In the end, she and the survivors, those precious few who hadn't fled from the camp outright, were left to their own devices. Some tried to salvage what remained of the camp. Some searched for loved ones they'd lost in the chaos. Others just walked away. They knew which way the wind was blowing. Of the initial 200, only half remained. Of those, barely a quarter were fit to fight with their injuries. The rest were women and children. Now their chieftain, their spring maiden, had been bested by some kind of bright lord. Vernal didn't know what else to call that transformation. Many in the tribe didn't want to believe what they'd seen. Hell, she wouldn't believe it if she hadn't seen it with her own eyes. She'd awoken near their end of their brawl just in time to see Naruto bat Raven about like a cat would a mouse. It was horrifying. Enthralling. Amazing. For all her might and talk of strength, Raven was no match for him. His was true strength. She wanted that. Assuming she survived the next few hours. She'd lived her life as Raven's shadow. As her second. Now, Vernal found not only her position in danger, but her very life as well. Raven had made few friends during her time with the tribe. And why would she? The tribe bowed to strength and strength alone, no more, no less. Raven ruled with an iron fist and many loathed her for it. She'd made enemies. Now that she'd been bested, Vernal knew she would be next. She wasn't like Raven. She wasn't strong. She wouldn't be able to fight them off, and she dared not risk the wilderness, not alone. Her small hands ate into angry little fists at the thought. She could only think of one way to escape this disaster with her life. Oddly enough, it wasn't an unpleasant thought for little Vernal. Yeah, she could do this. After all, she was nothing if not a survivor. Raven had called her that time and again, hadn't she? While it was true the tribe was done for, that didn't mean she had to die with it. Vernal swore she would survive. Raven immediately regretted opening her eyes. At first, it came as something of a shock that she managed to open them at all. Even then her vision was dim and faded, forcing her to squint uselessly in the darkness. Where was she? How had she gotten here? A brief sliver of panic tickled her breast before she remembered what had happened. Then she glimpsed the familiar tattered ceiling of her tent and realized what had transpired. Faint fire from a nearby pair of worn candles cast writhing shadows across the worn fabric in her face. She scowled at them, groaned, tried to roll over, and instantly regretted it when her ribs shrieked at her. So, she'd lost. All her training, all her might, all the power of the spring maiden, all of it had been for naught. Taking a moment to gather her bearings, Raven took stock of herself and her surroundings. Close check. Bruises more than she could count. Check. Pain would it hat bastarded Sodom hard. Check. Someone had taken her to bed, not like that. and wrapped her battered body in heavy blankets. Churnpich, cocooned more like. She felt like death warmed over and her everything hurt in the worst of ways. Not to mention her back. For a fleeting moment she feared she might be paralyzed, but no. A quick flex of her toes and fingers confirmed she still possessed full range of motion. Well, that was a relief if nothing else. She knew it could have been worse. Much worse. She could have cracked her head and gotten amnesia. Just the thought of it made her shiver. How long had she been out turning her head against the pillow? She blinked blearily. There was someone there, sitting beside her bunk, but her sleep-gummed eyes and dazed brain couldn't quite comprehend them. She beheld blue eyes and a messy mop of blonde hair. For a single, bleary moment, Raven Branwen glimpsed a familiar face and her heart skipped a beat. Tai, she croaked out his name. What are you doing here? A knife tickled the underside of her chin and Raven snapped awake. No, not Tai. Definitely not Tai. Her body locked up like a rusty spring, coiled tight yet unable to move for her injuries. She could feel the edge pressing against her flesh. That was warning enough not to be rash. Her aura must be at an all-time low for her to be able to feel the cool metal. When she raised her gaze, she found Naruto Uzumaki glaring pale blue daggers at her. Those bright blue eyes were cold, colder than Raven remembered, more akin to a frozen ocean rather than an endless sky. And she was on thin ice. One wrong step would send her plummeting through to a cold grave in oblivion. She should be terrified. Raven knew that, and a part of her was, but her anger burned hot and heady, overriding common sense. Come to gloat, have you? She spat at him. Here to lord your victory over me? He gazed back at her and said not a word. Well, say something. He didn't speak. Somehow, his silence riled Raven than anything he might have said. He looked dead. Almost lifeless. That defiant spark was gone from his eyes, in its place lay the void. Raven stared into that deep blue abyss and the abyss stared right back. Swallowed her whole. She'd seen that look before in some of her men, the ones so deadened by the act of violence that they no longer thought of it as such. She saw it in his eyes now. It was the look of a man with nothing left to lose. I thought about killing you in your sleep, you know. Her captor said suddenly, the words strangely soft in the silence of their tent. Kurama suggested it. A blink. He's still saying it. Right now. That wasn't something I wanted to do, but I still thought about it. Just thought you should know. He tilted his head, idly considering her as one might an ant beneath their boot. You're a threat and you clearly have no qualms when it comes to kidnapping people. Sparing my enemies doesn't seem to be working out for me too. Well, thus far. What do you think? The knife flashed into the air in an arc of blue light as it danced between his fingers. Oh, who am I kidding? Nobody cares what you think. Who in blazes was Kurama? There was no one else here in the tent. Moreover, why can't you take this seriously? The laughter, when it came, surprised her. It wasn't a mad cackle or some whiny, weeping thing. Raven knew he was much too strong for that. All that emerged was a soft, bitter chuckle. It made him sound like an old man, a weary soul with entirely too much on his mind and no way to lighten his burden. The noise seemed to echo on endlessly in the cramped confines of the tent. In truth, it lasted all of a moment. Naruto raised his gaze and she flinched at the arctic resolve there. Because that's what you want, he declared. And I'm not going to give it to you. Naruto's knife fell cured under Raven's chin and she dare not finish that sentence anytime soon. Now those cold blue eyes bored into her, searching for something. Whatever it was, they didn't find it. He shook his head and blew out at an angry breath. I killed some of your men too, her captor continued, speaking slowly to her. Haltingly, almost as if he weren't truly sure of what to say or how he should say it. I didn't mean to. They resisted. I fought back. They died. I don't feel guilty about. Should I? Now Raven began to understand that distant look in his eyes. I've killed monsters, demons and puppets, even immortals, but people, a shaky sigh rattled his shoulders. This is a first for me. They weren't good people, mind. I'd like to think the world is better off without them. Those dull blue eyes glanced down, found the knife in his hand and rose to meet hers. Maybe I should add one more to the tally. Just to be safe. For a moment, Raven thought he would kill her as well. It would be an escape from all this, certainly. She wasn't sure she wanted it. Do it then. She grabbed the knife at her throat and pulled it closer. I won't beg if that's what you're after. His arms tensed and despite her best efforts, the spring maiden flinched. She didn't want to die. Not here, not now, not ever. With no aura to protect her and her power all but exhausted, she couldn't fight him. It was all she could do to meet his eyes and keep herself from trembling. Did she have regrets? Plenty of them. Would she voice them? Never. In the end, Naruto leaned away. Just an inch. A fraction. enough to convey his intent. No. Unlike you, he shook his head, I'm not a monster. I don't kill for gold. Not for pleasure either. And what do you know of me? She tried lifting her chin, but he just leaned in again, keeping her from escaping. You know nothing. Oh, I know more than enough. The blonde bared his teeth at her in a snarl. Murderer. Amber told me how all about the maiden powers and how they pass on to other people. He sealed his teeth together with a harsh pop. She also told me about a certain missing maiden that vanished some years back. Surprise, surprise. Here you are. You slew an innocent girl to gain those abilities, didn't you? Go ahead. Deny it. She was too weak for this world. His eyes flashed. So you killed her. Just like that, Raven scowled at the ceiling and refused to answer him. He didn't understand, and she had no longing to explain herself. That girl had been weak. She'd run away, first from her responsibility, then again from her power. It sickened her. She'd refused to train. Given half a chance, she would have run straight to Salem. She'd made her choice. The power of the Spring Maiden couldn't fall into the hands of that witch, and it certainly couldn't go back to Ashbin. There was only one thing to be done, and she was the only one with the stones to do it. That's what I thought. Naruto's voice lashed at her like a WHP. You don't regret it, do you? I can see it in your eyes. You feel no remorse. You're worse than Kagaya. Who? Blue eyes pulsed into scarlet slits. Someone who would eat you alive. Neither spoke for a long moment after that. Raven out of fear, and Naruto in his simmering anger. Her fingers twitched for a sword that was no longer there, longing to bat the knife away. But she couldn't. Omen had been shattered during their brawl, hilt and all. She would need a new weapon going forward. One that wouldn't fail her so spectacularly. Assuming she survived the next 5 seconds. All right. Here's what you're going to do. Naruto hummed and took the kunai from her chin but kept his arm extended, the knife ready to slash forward at the slightest provocation. Even with her wounds, he knew better than to give her an escape. You're going to create a portal to Amber here and now. I'm going to walk through that portal. And you will never ever threaten me or mine again. Because if you do, I will end you. There was a weight to his words now, one that hadn't been there before, strangling the air itself. I don't want to cross that line, but I will if you push me. Understand? Blink once if you understand. Twice for no. Raven blinked once, steeled herself and opened her big mouth. I can't do it right now. You'll have to wait. Naruto stiffened. Wait. She cried out when the knife flashed back at her chin. Wait, wait, wait. My portals don't work that way, you louse. And even if they did, I've burned through my aura. Naruto tilted his head. And, just how dense are you? No aura, no semblance. She spat the words at him. No semblance, no portals. You beat me black and blue. And there was not so much as an iota of guilt in his eyes for that, demon him. I need time to recover, damn it. When he didn't relent, she turned her head aside and glowered at the floor. I can't make a portal to your woman anyway. It would have to be someone I have a bond with. Crow or maybe someone else. Bright blue eyes and an affable grin. Blonde hair. His name on her lips and tangled sheets as Shino. Raven seized those traitorous thought of Tai by the throat and strangled them. I'll only make a portal to Crow, she said. Your little beach is probably with the bird brain anyway. She expected anger for Naruto to snap at her at the very least. He didn't. Somehow that worried her more. How long? He asked. Raven considered lying but thought better of it. Something told her he'd notice any deception on her part. Call it a sixth sense. A while, she said. A day at most. It was the truth. Even with the might of a maiden coursing through her veins, he'd chopped her reserves down to nearly nothing. That took strength. Strength she hadn't been prepared for. For all her power, he'd snuffed her out like a candle. If she'd known he was that strong, she never would have gone near him. She'd been stupid. Arrogant. If this boy decided to cross the line, if he took it into his head to kill her, she wouldn't be able to stop him. Not when she was this weak. Coward that she was, the thought terrified her. Naruto frowned. Fine. One day. No more. It was evening already, so Raven half suspected the fool would leave her be and try to sleep. He glowered at her instead. She tried to rise, but her body betrayed her and buckled back to the bed. Don't try to sit up. He warned as she collapsed against the mattress. You're badly hurt. Didn't know this mark of mine could heal injuries like that. He gazed at his inked palm for a long moment. Apparently it can. Still, your body's going to be a bit of a mess for a while. A pause followed as he considered whether or not to keep going. He went with it. I didn't heal you all the way. Didn't trust you not to try something. Raven sneered at him. Now who's the monster? Still you? Blue eyes narrowed on her. You'll recover. Speaking of which, I want you to reign in your tribe. That or disband them. Just like that, a leaden weight settled in Raven's gut. Rein them in, he said. She hadn't even stopped to think of the tribe until this very moment. Everyone had seen that brawl. Worse, they'd seen her lose to the young man before her. All at once that weight turned to a lump of ice in her stomach, chilling her to the bone. In the tribe, the strongest ruled. Those who could not hold their position forfeited it. Likewise, a chieftain who lost a fight in such a manner could not rule. They'd never follow her now. Not after that display. Some would have left already, bringing word of what they'd seen with them. No amount of butchery or browbeating on her part would change their minds now. She'd be cast out. Without them she would be alone, with no one to blame but herself. Her fault. All her fault. I can't. An angry breath hitched in her throat. They won't listen to me. Because you lost. Realization dawned in his eyes. To me. Figured that out yourself, did you? Raven cast a baleful glare at him, baring her teeth when he didn't back down in the least. Strength is all that matters in the tribe. Which means those meatheads are going to me after this. Why did he look so annoyed by that leadership of the tribe was an honor, one many fought and died for? Did he think this was her intentional on her part? No. She refused to take the blame for this disaster. Never. This was all the brat's fault. Not hers. He'd ruined everything. Ruined her, ruined the tribe, ruined all her plans to stay out of this god's-forsaken shadow war. Ruined. Any hope she had of hiding was long gone now. Everyone knew who she was, and the where would soon follow after that little display. Salem would find her. Salem would come for her. Salem would corner her. Salem would beat her down, rip the power of the spring maiden from her broken body, and leave her corpse for the wolves. It was only a matter of time. Joining her was an option one Raven refused to consider. She knew full well what the Queen of the Grim did with her pawns once they'd exhausted their usefulness. Everything was expendable to that woman. They needed her to open a door. Nothing more. She would be cast aside the moment she fulfilled that purpose. That left Ashbin. Ashbin the liar. Ashbin the deceiver. Ashbin who knew she was the spring maiden thanks to Amber. He'd never let her out of his sight if she returned. Not now. Not ever. She refused to go back to that life again. Not if she could help it. That chapter in her life was over. Crow was a drunkard, Summer was gone, and Tino. Bad thoughts. Treacherous thoughts. Focus. With no allies, death awaited her. Be it soon or in the future, they would come for her. That much was a certainty. Hers would be a life lived in constant fear. Ever looking over her shoulder. Waiting for the knife in her back. Alone, she had a big red target painted on her back. Sure, she could cut a portal away if it came to a fight, but her portals led to problems of her own. Portals required a bond. That meant Yang, Crow, Tai, Ashbin. Each brought problems of their own. She was weak. Powerless. She felt like a child all over again. In her desperation, she went with a third option. Raven didn't like Naruto. Not at all. Not in the least. She respected his strength, but she loathed how easily he'd upended her life without a care in the world. Worse, he hadn't been trying and she'd accidentally instigated their conflict through her own foolishness. Not that she'd ever admit it. As far as she was concerned, he'd proven himself to be a right pain in the arse. But he could fight. Better than Crow. Better than a maiden. If Salem sent her agents after him, he would fight. He might even win. She gained nothing of making an enemy out of him, she had enough of those already. And in this moment she'd nothing left to lose. Raven latched onto him. You really can't trust Ashbin. She turned her gaze back on the blonde, pointedly ignoring the knife in his hand. He'll use you and throw you away. And here we go again. He's not done anything to me yet. Naruto crossed both arms before his chest and planted his feet in stubborn defiance. Between the two of you, I think I'll take my chances with him. Are you sure about that? She granted him a saccharine smile. Did you know he's immortal? When those pale blue eyes began to narrow, Raven barreled onward before he could try to dismiss her again. He can't die. On the odd chance that his current host somehow expires, he'll simply take on another. Can you truly trust someone like that? Naruto stiffened as he watched her lean back against her pillow. What is it, reincarnation or something? No. Raven's counter proved quick as she baited her hook and reeled him in. Ashbin is a parasite. His soul latches onto the mind of a like-minded host and consumes them. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, even years, but the result is always the same. In the end, only he remains. She would know. She'd learned that truth the strong way. You're not lying. I can sense that much. Still, she wasn't prepared for the black look that flashed across his face. What you just described reminds me of Orochimaru. A little too much. There he went, dropping another name like it meant something. Like it should mean something. Perhaps it did. Raven shrugged. To her, it was just a name. A face she'd never met. Little more. If it left him better inclined to believe her, then she wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I've dealt with immortals before in my world, he said. If he turns on me in amber, I'll sort it myself. That may well be. Raven scoffed and refused to falter in the face of his scorn. But then what about Salem? She can't be destroyed. Blue eyes fluttered shut and open in a rapid blink. Who in the blue hell is Salem? He didn't know. She could see the confusion in his eyes, burning bright without so much as a hint of duplicity. What was Ashbin thinking if this boy was a pawn and she assumed he was sorely uninformed? Even assuming he hadn't been told of Salem, there were too many things he didn't know. It almost felt like a trap. But she knew it wasn't. Ashbin couldn't have anticipated this unfortunate series of events. It just wasn't possible. That implied uncomfortable levels of foresight, something she'd rather not dwell on. In the end she settled for the truth. The truth was often more painful than any lie. And if it swayed him to her side, well, all the better. The creatures of Grimm have a emissary named Salem. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with infinite care as the blonde before her turned and sat, folding both legs beneath him. Raven wasn't fooled. She'd seen how agile he was. He could move in an instant. She can't be stopped. She can't be reasoned with, and she will not rest until humanity crumbles at her feet. Why should I believe any of this? Naturally, he didn't accept her claim right out of the gate. You may believe it, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. Now you're catching on. She crossed her legs beneath the blankets. I've been watching you. So far you've done nothing but accept what others tell you. You've just gone with the flow. Go ahead. Tell me I'm wrong. He didn't, and she fought down a smirk. That's going to get you killed. You need to question everything. Including you, Tisi. Cheeky brat. She turned her head aside and reached for a pitcher of water. Open your eyes. Otherwise you'll end up just as blind as Crow and your naive maiden. He frowned, and she took the opportunity to twist the knife a little deeper. Who's to say she won't turn on you too? Naruto twitched. Ah, did I touch a nerve? His body blazed gold. That was her only warning. Raven yelped in surprise as a glowing hand clamped down around her throat, blood turning to ice in her veins when her back crashed against her bed. A knee slammed into her torso when she tried to rise, pinning her and driving the breath from her lungs in a moment. She doubled over the limb and retched in surprise, gasping for air that refused to come. She hadn't seen Naruto move. Her eyes were on him the entire time, and she hadn't seen him move. Terror bloomed beneath her breast anew, and her heart hammered like the drums of a great hunt out for blood. No, her BLD. 3 words hissed between them. Slitted scarlet pupils bearing the emblem of a cross blazed into her ruby-red orbs. It was the first time she'd seen his transformation up close outside of battle. It only further served to heighten her fear. His body didn't so much glow as it did burn with black and yellow light. It hurt just to look at. But those hands, they were worse. Much worse. You don't get to insult Amber. Naruto hissed out the words in an angry breath. As far as I'm concerned, she's worth 20 of you. She's suffered enough. Leave her out of this. Raven gurgled wordlessly and nodded. Still, he didn't release her throat. She slapped his wrists to no avail. And you're wretched. He snapped in her face. Just listen to yourself. You're full of poison and hate. Cowardice and envy. Stop trying to turn me against my friends. Oh gods. Was he going to kill her? Wasn't he? She saw his eyes. Saw the anger, the rage, but also the fear. Fear for his partner's life. That fear drove him to do terrible things. I know more than you realize. Raven croaked out as he continued to squeeze her neck. Not just about you, and not just what I've been told, but things I've seen with my own eyes. Her vision began to blacken at the edges as his fingers dug in. I know the Grimm have a leader. I know people who can come back from the dead. She yelled at him. I know that magic is real. And I can prove it. It was all she could do to force the words out now, such was the pain. Without me you'll be wandering in the wilds for weeks, months. Naruto released her and she toppled back, gasping harshly. Still he didn't withdraw. We're never going to get along, are we? His words struck her like a slap in the face. I didn't think it was actually possible for me to hate someone this much. Congratulations. No. I could explain it to you, she rasped, massaging her sore throat with an bruised hand. But what's to stop you from attacking me again? It was a slip, came the reply as he settled down beside her. Won't happen again. Stay here with me and I'll answer all of your questions and more. You're strong. I can respect that. She offered him her hand, fingers splayed. With your power and mine we could make putty of just about anyone who challenged us. You could even bring that girl of yours here if you like. Amber would do well in the tribe. Think of it. When he didn't take it she raised her arms instead as though to paint a picture for him. With the three of us working together, Ashbin wouldn't dare move against us. His eyes flashed dangerously at the offer but as promised he didn't rise to the bait. Well, what say you? Naruto set his jaw. Not interested. Liar. Raven knew how to read people. She knew she'd caught his attention. Those raised in the tribe knew when to push and when to wait. Now was the time to push. Why limit yourself? She challenged him. With that semblance of yours, you're a lion among sheep. Act like one. His bitter chuckle surprised her. You really have no idea where I'm from, do you? I don't. Raven confessed readily. Does it matter? You could go back to Ashbin's impossible little war. She dared to smile when he looked away. You think you're strong. Maybe you are. And maybe he was. But Raven Branwen refused to deal in maybes. Strength means nothing to someone like Salem. Face her, and you'll meet the same fate as all those who came before you. That's not how I live. Now it was her turn to scowl at him. Like I said, I've dealt with immortals in my world. If you can't kill something, trap it. Seal it. Or talk them down. Naive boy. As if the Queen of the Grim wanted a but call. Remnant would be a far safer place if that were the case. Salem. Bloody. Monster. Raven empathized the last word with all the force she could. Ashbin may be forced to take a new host every time his expires, but she's a beast apart from him. When he didn't retort, the bandit queen dared to stab a finger at him. I just told you that your so-called strength means nothing to her. Bash her skull in her all you like. Another jab at the air between them followed, drawing a frown from her tormentor. She can't be destroyed. Even if you manage it, she'll just come back to life in the next instant. She's invincible. No one can stop her. Not you, not me, and certainly not Ashbin. A flash of pity burned through Naruto's gaze as he released his transformation. It must be strong, not trusting anyone. And what would you know of trust? Her mind hissed. You believe others far too easily. Trust isn't so easily earned. Outwardly, she tossed her hair and scowled. No, you've just abandoned everyone. He squinted at her suddenly and a fresh flash of recognition dawned in his eyes. Say, earlier you called me Tai. Who was that? Raven willed her thoughts into an iron vice and refused to dwell on happier times. No. That chapter of her life was over, the book was closed, its pages burned. Perhaps some small part of her regretted her decisions, but what of it? Going back now would only open old wounds. Yang was strong. Tai didn't need her. Not anymore. Perhaps Summer would have wanted that, but Summer wasn't here anymore. Any attempt to return on her part would have Ashbin on her doorstep within the hour. And who was to say Tai even wanted her back? He'd probably laugh at her, the cheeky little sit. He's a blonde bstrd. She grumbled when Naruto's stare didn't abate. Just like you. They're happy, she huffed. What does it matter? You'll never meet him. She'd said it to shut the brat up, but instead, those azure orbs widened yet further. Almost as if he remembered something. I think I might have. His words sent a cold wind through her soul. Do you have a daughter? Oh no. No. She didn't like where this was going. He wasn't even threatening her. It was, by all accounts, an innocent inquiry. A hole still opened in Raven's stomach. I don't see how that's any of your concern. She sniffed. Why do you ask? I saw someone who kinda looked like you. He muttered. Raven sucked in a breath through her teeth. Coincidence? No, I don't think it was. Naruto shook his head and placed a fist in an open palm, wholly ignorant of her dread. Back in Vale I saw someone. She was just a kid, but now that I think back on it, she looked like you. She had your face. And blonde hair. Violet eyes too. The kind you get when you mix red with blue. She saw the moment the gears sealed together in his head, but it vanished as he rounded on her. She expected anger when he realized the truth. Scorn at the very least. Instead, he just looked disappointed in her. That really was your kid, wasn't she? The silence that followed proved damning enough, and the FL-curing candle cast ghastly shadows over his whiskered face. Did you abandon her too? When she refused to answer, a spark disgust burned in his eyes. You really are a coward, aren't you? I don't know why I'm surprised. Shaking his head, he turned to leave. Wait, she snapped at him. Where are you going? To find a bed. A lone blue peered at her over his shoulder. You have nothing I want and I don't feel like dealing with you anymore tonight. Unacceptable. If she let Naruto walk away now, he was as good as lost to her. He'd leave come morning, the tribe would turn on her and she'd be cast out. She could beat them black and blue in his absence and they still wouldn't follow her. That didn't much bother Raven so much as one might think, but the idea of being alone, of having a target on her back very much so. There was one final gamble left to her. Time to play it. I can give you the relic. The words burst out of her before he could flee, before she could think to hold them back. Don't you want that? Relic? Naruto paused. Why should I care about some dusty old artifact? Now the momentum had shifted back in her favor. Raven seized it with a singular fervor and reeled him with her words. Ashbin didn't tell you about them either, she crooned, tilting her head so her dark hair fell across her right eye. My. He really doesn't trust you, does he, Raven? The air in the tent grew viciously oppressive as her would-be ally frowned at her. Stop playing games and get to the bloody point already. I'm not in the mood for this. He made the maidens, she hastened to explain. They serve a purpose. We're keys. That's the reason Salem hunts us. That got his attention, of course it did. Anything related to his precious little Amber had him perking up like a puppy, even if he tried to hide it. A small part of her admired the loyalty. Even if all this nonsense about being from another world was true, he'd proven himself remarkably dedicated to the Fall Maiden. Honestly, it made her a little jealous. Anyone who could fight like that, well, they may not be able to defeat Salem in her mind. But they give her agents hell. That kind of power wasn't meant for mortals. With that manner of might, she couldn't imagine Naruto being outmaneuvered by anything save the blackest treachery, or Salem herself. Keys to what, he asked. At the end of the day, Raven was a spiteful woman. If she was going down, then damn it, she was going to go down SW and Jinji. Holding the power of the Spring Maiden was a danger, but only so long as the vault remained sealed. If she were to open it, if someone were to take the relic within and depart, well, Salem would have bigger problems, wouldn't she? And if said someone took the relic elsewhere, Salem wouldn't bother with her or her powers. Hopefully. Maybe. It was reckless, but it was the only one choice left to her now. Vault. So she leaned forward, and told all, a savage smile overtaking her already pale face as her guest turned away from the exit one last time. There's for each kingdom. Each contains a relic, an item of great power from a bygone age. Creation, destruction, knowledge, and choice. Mistral hides the relic of knowledge in Haven Academy. She watched him perk up and knew she had him. Only the Spring Maiden can open the door to this vault, and with it, a being capable of answering any question you might ask. Well, 2 questions now, and perhaps a bit of an embellishment on her part, but still. She'd taken one for herself years ago with Lionheart none the wiser. That was how she knew the truth of Salem. It was knowledge she sought, and knowledge which had broken her so long ago. What she wouldn't give to take that question back. To ask something else. Jin was a cruel creature. She'd said knowledge was power. Ignorance was bliss then. Raven would rather be a naive fool than the wisest woman in the world. You want to go back to your world, brat? Here it was, the final card left in an already bad hand. To your real home, I can give you that. The relic will show you the way. Naruto hesitated, dithering just short of the exit. I'll open the vault. Raven forced herself to sit up, willed her gaze to rise, meet those cold blue eyes, and not flinch. You just have to take the relic. Use it and ask your 2 questions. Do what you wish with it afterwards, so long as you take it out of the vault. Throw it in the ocean afterward for all I care. You do that and you'll never hear from me again. Those keen blue eyes narrowed on her. You'll leave Amber alone, I swear it, she hummed. His resolve wavered and Raven almost hissed in triumph. Victory. She had him. She just knew it. If he wouldn't take his place within the tribe, then she could at least offload that diamond lamp onto him. It would be his problem after that. Not hers. Not that she cared. No man would refuse such an offer, not when it was gifted to them on a silver platter. Everyone had questions. Everyone wanted answers. Humans were, by their very nature, curious creatures. Only a fool would refuse. Something hardened in his gaze. We'll talk about this later. What? Her head whipped around, eyes wide. No. You can't go. Don't leave me like this. She was exhausted and all of the tribe had seen her weakness. What if someone took it into their heads to challenge her now, or worse, strike while she slept? She'd not survive the night. For all her skill and strength, she could barely move right now. Her aura was exhausted, down to the very dregs, and she didn't have a weapon. Naruto had made sure of that. There was nothing within her reach save that old water pitcher and a cup. She couldn't defend herself with those, much less cut a portal. She needed a weapon. A sword. A dagger at the very least. Why not? He regarded her curiously. What are you so afraid of? Everything. She wanted to howl the word at him, but she dare not say it for fear of breaking. Raven was afraid of Tai and her own traitorous heart. She was afraid of being alone. She was afraid of dying in a ditch full of regrets. And she had so many regrets now. She couldn't even count them all. Here at last they came bubbling up, heedless out her attempts to stomp them back into oblivion. "If you leave me alone tonight, the tribe will kill me," she hissed. "You're as good as killing me yourself." Rather than reply audibly, Naruto waved his hand and crossed his fingers. A plume of smoke answered him, causing Raven to jump as a pair of shadow clones appeared out of the ether. She balked at them, eyes widening in confusion. Well, that was ominous, wasn't it? She hadn't known he could do that. Just how much had he held back during their battle? These two will keep anyone from trying anything tonight. They'll also keep an eye on you. Naruto's words jerked her back to reality. Don't try to run or they'll hunt you down. That's even worse. Is it I don't owe you anything more? The blonde leaned back, shaking his head. And I certainly don't trust you not to run off the moment I turn my back. He snapped his fingers and the doppelgangers took up a flanking position on either side of her with nary a sound. I don't trust you. You left your daughter and husband alone, forsook your brother, your own BLD, and for what? His lips pursed in a thinly veiled scowl. Fear something else. Is Salem really that terrifying? He made a face. I won't pretend to understand why you're so afraid of her. He shrugged. Hope it was worth losing everyone. How dare he? Something snapped in the back of Raven's mind as the last thread of restraint giving way deep inside her. Oh, dare he? Who are you to judge me? She tried to surge upright but her legs betrayed her and buckled. She collapsed against the pillows and slapped with a wordless snarl. You have no right. I have every right. Naruto was there to meet her, to catch her, but not timed the way she expected. His forehead slammed down against hers when she tried to rise again, scarlet slits narrow and angry as they lanced into her own. Because I've been where you are right now. I fought a monster, a freaking goddess. I was afraid. I was terrified. But I never ran away. Then you're even more of a fool than I thought. Slap. His hand cracked across her face like a WHP and snapped her head to the side, leaving a stinging red handprint in its wake. Yeah, that's right. I'm a fool. Naruto bellowed right back at her as she touched a hand to her cheek and gawked at him. A fool who never quits. A fool who never gives up. The biggest DMN fool there is. When Raven tore her gaze away in a huff, he stormed to the other side of the bed to catch her out. When the chips were down, I persevered. I kept going, damn it. I may have wavered at times, but I never gave in. And you? Look at you. The mighty Raven Branwen, squatting in the woods. Some hero you turned out to be. He turned his head and spat at her feet. I'll never be like you, coward. In a stiff, jerky movement, Naruto climbed off the bed off her, and stormed away in a huff. A passing insult sailed over his shoulder. If you had half a heart, you'd take responsibility for your actions, he said. But you won't, will you? You're too afraid. With a rustle of cloth, Naruto pulled the tent flap back and departed. And just like that, she was alone. Coward. The word damned her. Condemned her. Cut her deeper than anyone could. When the tears finally came, Raven found she couldn't fight them. Vernal was waiting for him when he left Raven's tent. Little more than a faint silhouette against the setting sun, she stood with her boots braced in the dirt and both arms folded across her chest. Poor girl looked a shadow of her former self. She'd been short enough to begin with, but now she looked downright tiny. Skittish too. Ready to bolt at the slightest provocations. Just looking at her made Naruto wince. She was clearly terrified of him. And yet there was something else burning there in her gaze, something he was almost alarmed to recognize as envy. Damn it, now I feel bad for scaring her like that, but with her stood others. Dozens of them. More than he cared to count. Naruto eyed the lot of them like the vipers they were. Why were they here? Was this some misguided attempt at revenge? There were a ragged bunch, women and children among them, old men, grizzled warriors, even wizened crones who squinted at him with beady eyes. Some were armed. Some weren't. Those who had weapons clutched them in tight, white-knuckled hands as he stalked forward. Can we not do this right now? He raised his voice in a warning. I just want to curl up, go to bed, and pretend this day never happened. Better the devils you know than the ones you don't. Vernal's dirty blue eyes focused him up and down as he came to a halt before the tribe. Naruto noted the dark bags beneath her eyes. She seemed weary. Gone was the arrogance and pride that he'd witnessed upon their first meeting. Small wonder there. He'd spooked it right out of her. Now this slip of a girl regarded him with wary deference. So you did it? She said by way of greeting. You beat Raven. Naruto grunted. Slapped her too. Vernal's jaw popped open before she managed to stir herself. Then she lunged at him. The wayward Shinobi tensed, bracing for an attack that never came. Because Vernal didn't attack. There was no knife in her hand, no gun in her palms as she lurched forward. She knelt. Every man, woman, and child behind her did the same. Some hesitated longer than others, some shot him nasty looks, but of the roughly 100 or so folk before him, everyone eventually capitulated. One after another they bent the knee. It was akin to watching a wave flowing in reverse. Vernal was the source, and the queen is dead. Vernal declared, planting one fist in the dirt as she bowed her head. Long live the king. Naruto's jaw sealed open. A raven wasn't dead. Battered and bruised perhaps, with a wounded ego besides, but he'd left her very much alive. Very much alive. His clones wouldn't let any harm come to her until she recovered. Once she regained her aura, she wouldn't be his problem anymore. He didn't want anything to do with that awful woman. What kind of parent just abandoned their child? At least Minato and Kushina had an excuse. They'd done it to protect him. Raven didn't even leave her kid that luxury. She just left. For some reason, that alone burned him more than anything she'd done. Unfortunately, she'd left him with a bunch of bandits kneeling at his feet, waiting for a response. The hell is this? He'd expected something but not this. Anything but this. You beat the boss. Vernal raised her gaze to meet his. That makes you the strongest, and the strongest warrior rules the tribe. That's how it's always been. What are your orders? This might be a problem. Kurama hissed in his ear. If they think you're the leader, you can deal with them as you please, but if you just disband them here and now, what do you think will happen to the countryside? These people know only one way of life. Naruto winced. He could see it now. While Mistral had its own huntsmen and they wouldn't exactly be overrun by banditry, this wasn't something it needed. He'd underestimated his strength and killed people here. That was something he would have to live with, but the last thing he wanted to do was turn this motley crew loose on the world. That meant he had to rein them in. But how and to what end? He couldn't let them carry on as they had, he simply couldn't. His very soul revolted against the notion. Then let's use them, his partner suggested. They're waiting for orders. Hope you're a good actor. Try your best Madara impression. They might fall for that. An idea ignited in the back of Naruto's head. Use them, he'd said. Well, he could think of one way to do that. As to the acting, all right, you lot. It was almost painful to see the lot of them wince when he cleared his throat, but the blonde steeled his heart against it and barreled onward. There's gonna be some changes around here. No more raids, you hear me? No hurting the helpless either. It's high time you set your sights on worthier prey. That was horrible. You're horrible. A restless murmur passed through the tribe. We're fighting huntsmen. Naruto wasn't sure who asked the question, but he silenced them all the same. No. He slammed his arms together and in shape before his chest. None of that. Do you want to die or something? He might not like these people, but he didn't want to fling them at Haven. Nor could he turn all of them over to the authorities, tempting though it was. He'd already killed the worst offenders during his assault, and those that remained were little more than camp followers. None of them were innocent to be sure, but he'd be separating families if he tried to push the matter. Kurama hummed. See, you can do it if you try. The old fox had a point, ghastly though it was. No, he couldn't give these folk to Haven with a clean conscience. Parents would be imprisoned, children would be thrown out on their ears, and the elderly would be left to die in the wilds. He'd like to avoid such a senseless slaughter. Surely these bandits could change their ways. Right, he wanted to believe that. He really truly did. Who do we fight then? Someone snorted. Grim the White Fang? Yeah, he had no idea who or what that was. Still he perked up. Are they bad guys? His gaze fell to Vernal. She winced, but realized he was waiting for an answer and shrugged. Yes, great. Naruto snapped his fingers at her with a grin. You heard the little lady. There's my first order. Any objections? I've got one. An absolute mountain of a man clad with graying hair and silver eyes drew himself upright, his brow set in a frown. You ruined our camp, lad. The Grim will come for us. What will you do about this? That is one Bayig Beach. Naruto winced for a different reason as a fresh spark of guilt stabbed at his chest. With a put-upon sigh, he scratched the back of his head. Bandits or no, he'd torn up their home. Now that the adrenaline had worn off and they were no longer trying to actively detain him, it was strong not to feel a little guilty about his actions. He'd overreacted. Badly. Did he regret fighting back? Not a bit. Raven had kidnapped him and he'd fought in self-defense. But that needn't make him a monster. He'd never be like her. Sorry about that. He frowned. I didn't get your name, Gregor. The man granted him a grunt. What do you do here, Gregor? I hunt. Credit where it was due, the man didn't flinch. Perhaps it had something to do with the massive sword on his back. Yish. You could split a tree with that thing. He didn't remember fighting this behemoth. He would have recalled meeting someone like this. Perhaps he'd been away from camp during the brawl. The salt and pepper hair proved warning enough given his profession, but it was the chill in those stern silver orbs that concerned him. It was like looking up at a mountain. It would not be moved, and neither would this man without good measure. So you're a huntsman? He inquired. No. The old warrior shook his head and planted his feet together. I hunt. Naruto nearly whistled. As in hunting game animals with a sword like that. Oh, did he use it as a javelin or something? Stranger still, he didn't sense any ill intent from the warrior before him. There was no anger in his gaze, no spite in his scowl, nor malice in his stance. He simply was. Almost made him wonder how someone like this wound up here. Gregor's one of our best hunters. Vernal chimed at Naruto's elbow, thereby drawing his attention. He's in charge of keeping the tribe fed. Makes a mean beef stew too. I also guard our walls, the older man declared, planting his feet. You tore them down. We lacked the time and people needed to repair them before sunset. His dark brow furrowed. More will die. I won't be staying long. Naruto protested. Gregor growled. Then you forsake your duties as chieftain. Hey, I didn't ask Raven to kidnap me. He bit back. She started this mess in the first place. Nevertheless, she is beaten and you stand before us. The tribe is yours to command unless you intend to forsake it. An angry murmur passed through the tribe. They hadn't chosen the most eloquent man to voice their discontent, but he made it clear well enough. Naruto took a deep breath, exhaled, and let their anger roll off his shoulders like so much water off a duck's back. He knew he couldn't do anything about that, but a slow, impish smile spread across his face. Fine. If they wanted to play strong, he'd make them eat their words. And their boots besides. We could just trample the lot of them. Kurama suggested. I could do it for you if you're feeling squeamish. No. He bridled at the thought. Self-defense is one thing, but I'm not about to murder these people in cold blood. Then you need to deal with them now? Steeling himself, Naruto blew out a breath and slapped a hand to his forehead. He couldn't be himself here. They'd never listen to him otherwise. Worse, they might take it into their heads and break apart the moment he left. He needed a way to keep them in line in his absence, a surefire method that no one would dare challenge. Raven had all but said that the tribe valued strength above all else. They wanted strength, he'd give them strength, even if it was only a ruse. Channeling his best impression of a certain Uchiha, he raised his voice to be heard by all. I'm not forsaking anything, he snapped. You just need a few bodies to repair the walls, right? Gregor paused, considered, and nodded. A few healthy lads would work. A raid or two would replenish our numbers. No raids. But if you had enough supplies and helpers on hand, Naruto hastened on with a pleasant smile, you could build new barriers quickly, right? I suppose. Vernal looked left. Vernal looked right. Vernal failed to understand what was happening. Nor did Gregor. That was fine. He needed their surprise to sell the act. Sasuke would be rolling in his grave if he saw him acting like this. Like him. Good. That reminder steadied Naruto's thoughts and marshaled them. And a new gate, he challenged. Given enough time and resources, certainly. Vernal fixed Naruto with a perplexed look, but he ignored her. Done. Are you blind, boy? Gregor touched a hand to the hilt of his sword. We don't have enough. With a quick FLCK of the wrist followed by a pulse of chakra, Naruto crossed his fingers and fell back on his favorite technique. Even after his bout with Raven, his reserves were full to bursting. The jutsu didn't fail him. A series of startled yelps rose in his ears as smoke swelled up around him. Anyone who thought to challenge him in that moment went silent as the grave. Witnessing the BRTH of Shadow Clone Army did that to you. That wary acceptance he'd received before was outright awe now. When Naruto turned back to face the old bandit, he found Gregor's eyes had widened. Almost imperceptibly, but for one trained as a shinobi, it was impossible to miss. Naruto tilted his head, and each clone mirrored the motion in perfect symmetry. There. Any questions? No. Gregor shook his head slowly as he gazed upon the horde. That's quite the semblance. You're kidding me. Vernal nearly fainted on her feet. Be bullshit. I call bullshit. Language. Naruto FLK'd the back of the girl's head, but he didn't correct her either. You wanted help. He spread his arms, knowing all eyes were on him. Good. He could play the part a little longer. Use them as you see fit, but harm a hair on anyone's head and there'll be hell to pay. Hrmsh. A spindly man with a weaselly face prodded a clone's cheek. They solid could be illusions for all we know. Why are? In response, said clone reared back and bit the intruding finger with vicious force. The bandit recoiled with a yelp, clutching the now bloody digit to his chest. Another ripple ran through the tribe. This time it was confusion rather than anger that stirred them. Was it wrong that he took a bit of vindictive pleasure in that? Just a little behind him, Naruto swore he heard Vernal curse and topple backwards. Naughty girl. Someone ought to wash her mouth out with a bar of soap. Does that answer your question? Gregor snorted. They're real fool. Then he turned to face Naruto. You'll be needing a second in command if you want to keep this lot in line. He offered him a burly forearm as he spoke. Especially if you intend to travel to and from the tribe. I'd like to throw my hat in that arena. Naruto fl glanced to Vernal as she climbed to her feet. The girl started under his attention, then preened when she realized he wasn't just waiting for any opinion, but her input. He wasn't quite sure how to feel about the bright look shining high and bright in her eyes in that moment. Still, she capitulated to him readily enough. He's better than most, the little bandit muttered, kicking a booted foot against the dirt. Gregor's called the mountain for a reason. You'll not find a stronger sword, not with Raven down for the count. Gregor unbent enough to nod. She's telling the truth. There's a reason I've lived this long. His gaze strayed past him to the lone remaining tent. What do you intend to do with her, Vernal? He blinked, not quite comprehending. Raven. A bark of laughter burst out of him. I'll decide come morning. Seeing no other option, he reached out, clasped the giant's hand in his own and shook. Those keen silver eyes narrowed in what might have been triumph in the faint torchlight. As you say, War Chief. Naruto frowned. War Chief, you're sending us to battle against the White Fang and the Grim. Gregor rumbled. That implies a war. It'll keep our blades sharp at the very least. War Chief. I like it. Kurama could be such a child sometimes. Fair enough. A wave and a command split the sea of clones, and Twine half went with Gregor to repair the ruined palisade and chop down trees for the gate, while the rest dispersed among the remaining bandits to forage for supplies or attend to other mundane tasks. Naruto kept an eye on the tribe until he was certain they'd let him be, until the very last soul had shuffled off with at least one of his doppelgangers to make repairs. Then and only then did he dare look away. Well, that's done. Kurama congratulated him. Not a bad job. I think the big one likes you. Oh, buzz off. Vernal tugged at his sleeve and he risked a glance at her. Only then did he notice the pack on her back. Less so the words that came after. When do we leave? At first Naruto's mind didn't quite comprehend what she'd said. Of all the responses, he'd not expected that. You're strong. As he looked on, little Vernal adjusted the straps on her pack and tried not to falter beneath his gaze. You beat Raven like it was nothing. Well, I didn't think you could do it. But you did. Her nose wrinkled as she struggled with the words. That's true strength. I want that. I need that. I don't want to be weak again. Please. She all but threw herself at his feet. Teach me. Kurama crooned. You have a student. Bite me fur. She looked so pitiful that he almost went along with it solely out of habit. Then reality snapped back and he realized what she was asking. I'm going with you. She jutted her chin out at him defiantly. You can't stop me. Yeah, no. His good cheer vanished. Not happening. There is no we. He fl ked his fingers back and forth between the two of them. I'm leaving the moment Raven can make a portal. You're staying here. She scrambled after him. That's not fair. Oh, she wanted to talk about fair now, did she? An irritated growl fled from his lips and she flinched. Naruto immediately realized what he'd done and then drew back. Sorry about that. He palmed his face. I didn't mean to scare you. He shook his head and grimaced as he felt another migraine coming on. Now isn't a good time for this. I've had a long day. Then when? Vernal buelled into his side and butted her head against his arm. You said it yourself, you're leaving tomorrow? Later. Naruto grumbled, only to pause as an ugly thought occurred to him. Raven had mentioned a vault. What do you know about relics? He asked. You mean the lamp? Vernal perked up, no doubt eager to make herself useful. Perhaps she was looking to redeem herself in his eyes. He wasn't sure. It hurt to see all the same. This girl had lived most of her life following the strong, obeying people like Raven. Now she'd latched onto him. Strong. Raven would talk about it sometimes when she drank. The little bandit grimaced as his gaze fixed on her. When she drank a lot. Supposedly it can grant you knowledge or some such. She said I had to know that sort of thing if we were going to pass me off as the Spring Maiden. Naruto winced. I'm sorry. I didn't know about that. Sakai, she waved a hand. I didn't mind. You should. He caught it and wrenched her arm down. There are people after that power. They'll kill for it. They have killed. A grimace stole over his whiskered face as he recalled what Raven had done. You would have died. But now I won't. Vernal crossed her arms and replied with the unfaltering surety only a child could possess. Her secret's out. And you're here. You won't let me die. No, no, no. His mind cried. Don't falter. She's an enemy. Some of your best friends were bitter rivals at one point. You're taking me with you when you go, right? Before he could respond to that unpleasant truth, Vernal latched onto his sleeve again. I helped you. You owe me. When he didn't reply, she huffed and stomped on his foot. You said it yourself. I'll die if you don't. Her words stopped Naruto in his tracks. You're not in danger anymore though. I was Raven's second. Her dirty blue eyes narrowed. Her apprentice in all but name. Gregor or no, the tribe will eat me alive if you leave me here. Naruto bristled because she wasn't lying. He could sense that much. Gregor might follow his commands, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. And his clones wouldn't keep forever. Sooner or later they'd run out chakra, and then where would she be, a little girl surrounded by a bunch of bandits? Bandits that he was trying to reform, but bandits still. You gonna take the relic? Maybe, he confessed. I don't know. Haven't decided yet. Still, a chance to find the truth, the possibility to go home, it called to him. Naruto opened his mouth to reply to that effect, only to jump as something vibrated violently in his pocket. Ga. It took him a moment to realize he wasn't being attacked, rather, it was his scroll yelping angrily in his trousers. He ripped it out and balked at it. How the hell am I getting reception all the way out here? We're close to Haven. As ever, Vernal was quick to supply him with the answer. See that? She pointed to a spire in the distance. You can see the CCT tower from here. Naruto saw the caller ID and grimaced. Ember. Oh, she's gonna kill me. With great trepidation he fumbled his scroll open and held it out before him as he'd been instructed to do. There was no image to be found as the call connected. At a loss for anything else, he held it up to his right ear. A harsh squeal of status ear, perhaps it was wind, greeted him and he winced. Then came a soft CLCK followed by painful silence. Baffled, he held it out again. Hey partner. He began as eloquently as he could. I know you're mad, but, Naruto. Amber's voice yelped back in naked relief. You're all right. Yup. Raven and I fought and Ikinda took her tribe out from under her. You did what? Crow's voice squawked somewhere in the background. What? Oh. And Naruto blinked. What's OL Birdbrain doing there? You know what, never mind. Please tell me you're on your way here. The words escaped him in a groan. I have no idea what I'm doing. Another thought hit him and he voiced it quickly. Raven's the spring maiden, by the way. Thought you should know. I know. Amber sounded grimly pleased. She accidentally revealed herself to me. Ashbin's over the moon. There's more. He amended with an irritated glance over his shoulder. Vernal blew a raspberry at him. Apparently I have a student now too. She mentioned something about a relic and a lamp. Also, apparently there's a madwoman named Salem in charge of the Grim. This time, try as he might, Naruto couldn't quite keep the challenge from his voice. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Crow swore. Amber squeaked. Well, don't lead me on here. A Prgnant pause followed, twisting his guts into ugly knots. He dreaded the thought of Amber keeping secrets. She was one of the few people he trusted in this world, and Raven's poison words threatened to turn that trust toxic. He wanted to believe that she was innocent in all this, just a pawn in a larger game. If she'd been holding out on him, actively keeping him in the dark, well, he wasn't sure what he'd do. That frightened him more than words ever could. In the end, he needn't have worried, for her reply proved swift. I only know a little, honest. There was a decidedly sheepish note in the Fall Maiden's voice when she answered. Ashbin didn't tell me much. What's this about a lamp now? Let me talk to him. Crow cried. Not with your semblance, Buster. Amber snapped back. It's a miracle we haven't crashed yet. As if waiting for that very cue, the connection FL keyed. Blast it, we're losing you. Listen. Amber's tan face swam before the scroll for a moment and he glimpsed the fear in her eyes before it vanished again. Stay there, and whatever you say, whatever you do, don't let Raven leave. You can't. She said something else, but the call cut her words to ribbons. There's a chance Salem might make a move on her. We've commandeered a bullhead and should be there in a few hours. Stay put. Sure. Naruto spared another glance for Vernal. There's somewhere I want to visit before we return to Vale, though. Name it. His eyes narrowed, focused on the spire in the distance. Haven, that young man is the key to everything, Crow. He could turn the tide against Salem. We need him on our side. We must have him. no matter the cost. I get what you're saying here, Oz, but it's not you the kid's gonna be loyal to. He'll protect Amber. You gotta remember that. Yes, I'm well aware of his feelings for our fall maiden. From what I've seen, she feels the same. No, I don't like that look. You're planning something. Don't push them together. It won't end well. I can see it now. Any son or daughter of theirs would be a powerhouse. And there he goes. He'll be like this all day. A discussion. Time of the turning, interlude. By some miracle, Raven Branwen didn't flee in the dead of night. That came as something of a surprise for Naruto, not necessarily a welcome one. In all honesty, he'd expected the spring maiden to bolt the moment he took his eyes off her. Raven seemed the sort, and he knew her type. She was a coward. One who would run away from danger the moment they could. So he slept lightly with Vernal by his side, waiting for one of his clones to sound the alarm, prepared to bolt upright at the slightest provocation. He'd been braced for a wild goose chase across the Four Kingdoms because he knew the measure of her and didn't trust the Branwen woman one bit. Still, if she'd run away, well, that would have been annoying. He would have caught her, of course, but still. Maybe his luck was finally turning around. Maybe she realized she was trapped, that she'd screwed herself with nowhere left to go. Who could say? But when he went to check in on her the next morning and found her reclining in bed without a care in the world, Naruto knew she was up to something. Why, you ask? Elementary, of course. You see, Raven was smiling. That smile alone set off 1,000 warning bells in the back of Naruto's head. He knew it all too well, having seen it in the face of countless enemies before. Orochimaru, Madara, even Kaguya near the end. It was the smile of a predator ready to pounce. The grin of a foe who thought they had the upper hand. She was still flanked by the 2 clones he'd left behind, and though they steadfastly refused to look at her, she nevertheless projected a strange air of confidence that hadn't been there last night. Come to check on me, have you? Pearly white teeth flashed at him as he stepped into her tent. To what do I owe the pleasure? Naruto felt his right eye begin to twitch. To his keen eyes, Raven looked far healthier than she'd been last evening. She wasn't quite as pale as he remembered, and the dark circles were all but gone from her eyes. When he dispelled his clones, she even sat up properly as well, meaning her aura must have recovered enough to hasten her recovery in that regard. She was also naked. Once upon a time, Naruto would have sputtered and flailed like a hormonal teenager at the sight of a naked woman. He would have shouted and shrieked for Raven to put clothes on, and when that failed, bolted from her tent like a lemming. Now he'd been ripped from his world, rescued a young woman who used magic, been kidnapped, learned of an immortal being that reminded him of Kaguya, and taken on an apprentice. In that order. He wasn't about to be undone by a pair of tips, no matter how lovely they might seem. No. He was strong. He was a rock, unmovable, unshakable. His eyes betrayed him and he looked down. Bugger. Ugh, it's too early for this sit. Kurama yawned, gazed through his eyes, and didn't wait for an answer. I'm going back to sleep, Naruto agreed wholeheartedly. Why are you naked? Why not? Raven tilted her head to regard him. I sleep as I please. The Jinchuriki slapped a palm against his forehead. Yes, I can see that. Clothes now, please. Why? Her grin grew an inch as she tossed her hair to one side. It did lovely things to her chest. Am I making you uncomfortable? Very much so, yes. He dare not speak the words aloud. They'd give her power over him, and that was the last thing he wanted from someone like her. Raven must have seen his discomfort regardless, because she rose from her bed with a languid sigh. The sheets slid from her lower torso like water off a duck's back, revealing herself fully to his wide eyes. Rather than cross the room and bridge the gap between them immediately, the bandit queen took time to stretch, deliberately drawing out the moment and his discomfort. As long as she could. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, fingernails all but biting into his palms until they drew blood. The brief flash of pain steadied him, helped him focus once more. I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. She padded towards him, her hips swaying, bare feet treading lightly against the dirt. Why don't we start over and re-evaluate our partnership? If she felt any shame in her nakedness, she didn't show it. Why should she? She was an appealing woman, toned in all the right places, yet with flowing curves in others. What few scars she had, she bore with pride, even if he'd been responsible for a few of them. A fracture etched itself into Naruto's resolve, but he held fast until his eyes betrayed him yet again. Ani. A small, distant part of Naruto's brain mused as she continued her approach. Curtains match. That snow. Bad brain. Behave. So tense. The spring maiden purred into the silence, running a hand down his arm. Look at you. You're stiff as a board. In more ways than one. I don't mind being hated, but I hate being misunderstood. He slapped her hand away, inhaled, and set his jaw. Sure enough, he found the telltale scent of alcohol on her breath. Kurama might have abandoned him to this, but he didn't trust Raven one bit. I'll take your offer for the relic, but that's all. And once again, for the love of ramen, get dressed. Fair enough. Raven allowed, ignoring him entirely. But can you really go back to trusting someone who's kept so much from you? I don't trust Ashbin. He lifted his chin in stubborn defiance. But you do trust his little maiden. She retorted, jabbing his cheek with a manicured nail. Did it ever occur to you that she might be wrapped around his little finger just as much, if not more so than you? He snapped at her finger when she tried jab him yet again, and she withdrew the questing digit with a scowl. She probably laps up whatever lies he feeds her. Just like my fool of a brother. We are not having this conversation again. To her credit, Raven realized she trod upon a landmine because she backed up and raised her hands in a placating gesture. She then turned and rummaged about in a nearby war chest before pulling out a thin strip of silk that could only be underwear. She slid her legs through the panties with agonizing slowness, much to his dismay. Red lace. His brain supplied less than helpfully. Under his less than amused gaze, she straightened and ran a hand through her dark hair. Better? And the rest? Naruto felt the beginnings of a migraine coming on again. Nah, she granted him a Cheshire grin. Don't feel like it? Naruto nearly slammed his head into the ground. Come now, don't be so rude. Alright, I'll bite. He schooled his face into what he hoped was an impassive expression. What the hell is this supposed to be? Are you trying to stuck me or something? That depends entirely on you. Raven touched a hand to his shoulder and began to circle him like a shark, one hand gliding over his body all the while. By now, her grin bordered on insufferable. Arrogant even. She knew the effect she was having on him. Is it working? Yes, no, maybe so. Naruto crossed both arms before his blazer, willing himself to meet her eyes and absolutely nothing else as she continued to circle him. There was no denying that Raven was lovely. Even a fool could see that. She was a fighter. A warrior, one on Crow's level if not higher still. The sight of her stirred strange feelings in him, things he'd not experienced before. Her eyes danced in the early morning light and her smile promised secrets and softness and warmth unending. Naruto knew poison lurked beneath that sly smirk of hers. He didn't dare drink of it. Because at the day Raven Branwen wasn't a good person. She'd made no secret of it. She was a self-serving coward who cared only for strength and little else. Only 24 hours ago, this woman had held Amber hostage. That wasn't something he was willing to forgive, not anytime soon. After all, he'd pounded her into the ground for it. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Don't think about pounding right now. He marshaled his thoughts and arrayed them in a bulwark against her feminine wiles. You need her for the relic. That's all. Don't let her get in your head. So strong and yet so naive. Raven stopped suddenly before him and cupped his face in one hand. You had too ever laid with a woman before, and this was officially veering into unwanted territory? None of that. Full stop. Breaks. Stop. Naruto wrenched his chin down, breaking her grip. That's enough. Drop the act already. I'm not acting, you dolt. She grabbed for him again and he caught her wrist. Neither am I. That didn't stop Raven. Far from it, his actions only seemed to embolden the spring maiden. She didn't try to pull away, rather she stepped into him. Even as he felt the bones of her right arm grind under his grip, she looped her left around his waist. For a moment his body faltered and he went weak at the knees. Her body was warm and soft against him, her hips pressed to his. She was clearly willing, and unlike Winter, she wasn't forcing him into anything. Would it be so wrong to know? Treacherous thoughts. Resist. His eyes flashed and he leaned back. Raven scowled. There it is again. That blasted restraint of yours. When will you learn to discard it? She shook her head, disappointment flashing through her crimson gaze. Even now with my aura returned, you could break my arm like a twig. I thought you were strong. I'm stronger than you. The words slipped out before he could think to hold them back and he cursed inwardly. Screw it. Or do you need a reminder? I might. Raven's gaze lit with triumph as she leaned forward. You're not acting like you're strong. If anything, you're being a scared little beach. Her lips brushed his ear in a sneer, breath warm on his face. Where's the warrior who trounced me yesterday? Did he run away? I don't see him anywhere. His grip tightened on her arm and Raven's taunt became a hiss of pain as the bones in her wrist began to buckle. There he is. Her grin was almost euphoric. Welcome back. For a moment Naruto almost considered kicking her, but to Kingdom Come if only to silence Raven's inane prattling once and for all. He knew she was goading him. Trying to get a reaction. It made him want to shut her up for good. The thought alarmed him a moment later and he balked at it. He disliked Raven, but he wasn't about to maim or humiliate her to prove a point. He was above such things. Wasn't he? We could fight again if you like. The former huntress regarded him through half-lidded eyes. Or you could take me right here. Go on. Do it. Show your strength. Kurama, Naruto called out in vain. Buddy pal, I could use a little help here? Nope. Came the immediate reply. Not messing with crazy. She's cracked. Did I break her or something? Nope. Don't hang me out to dry, damn it. Nope. A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw and he slapped some sense back into himself. Bloody Raven and her bloody fascination for strength. He knew what she was doing. This was just another one of her power plays. He'd not fall for her tricks. But for some reason he couldn't sense any ill intent emanating from her. None directed toward him at least. Despite his misgivings, she wasn't planning on stabbing him in the back. She couldn't possibly be genuine in this, could she please? No. Not that. Anything but that. He didn't think his mind could handle the idea of Raven being genuinely interested in him. I'm not exactly looking for a relationship here. Naruto struggled out. Good. Her mouth nibbled the edge of his ear, drawing an irritated hiss from him. Neither am I. Naruto considered to knock her out. Nearly did at that. But he needed her for that diamond door. She couldn't open it if she was out cold, and the fact remained she hadn't recovered fully. If he hit her too strong he might inflict some permanent damage. If that were to happen he could try to blast down the vault himself, but he wasn't sure that would work. Magic was tricky like that. If he let Raven slip away now, he might never find her again and his questions would never be answered. It wasn't a risk he was willing to take. That meant keeping her under constant watch, if not placating her outright, but not like this. A certain part of his anatomy argued otherwise. Quite loudly. He was fairly certain someone had tried this once before back in his world. Hadn't they? He distinctly remembered an enemy kissing him, trying to SCK the life out of him, and nearly succeeding. While he doubted Raven possessed such an ability, the memory was more than enough to snap him back to reality, painful though it might be. He'd survived that attempt, and he'd survive whatever the hell this was. She had made no secret of trying to convert him to her way of thinking before. And while she'd sowed a few seeds of doubt, he still wasn't willing to throw his lot in with her. Not now. Maybe not ever, even if some small part of him seemed intent on lusting after her bad touch. Ugh. He finally flung up his arms in a shove and turned away. I can't stand you. You bring out the worst in me. Good. Your worst is what I want. Raven stomped a bare foot down, causing the dirt to buckle beneath her toes. Get angry. Show me who you truly are. You could be so much more than this. Yet you shackle yourself. Restraint. Morality. Decency. You don't need them. Throw them away. Her eyes flashed and hands swept through the air between them, trailing blue sparks. You allow Ashbin to lead you around by the dog like some cur and play at being a pauper when you could be a prince. A king. A god among men. I don't want any of that, he snarled. Naruto turned back to refute her with a snarl, and a blur of motion greeted him. For once he wasn't quick enough to catch her. Frustration slowed him. Just a touch. Just a hair. It shouldn't have made a LCK of difference in the long run. He was stronger than Raven. Faster at the very least. He could easily overpower her if it came to fight. But here in this moment he wasn't thinking clearly. His sixth sense shrieked as a spike of negativity assailed him, but no blade struck his back, no sword found his stomach. Instead, an open palm cracked across Naruto's face. His head snapped to the right and he blinked in surprise, incredulous as he touched a hand to the throbbing red handprint she'd left on his cheek. Pain. Actual pain. He'd almost forgotten what it felt like since he came to Remnant. Being slapped by a naked woman hadn't been on his to-do list today. Something ugly bubbled up in him. Frustration. Anger. Something else he'd rather not speak of. Really? An eye began to twitch. We're doing this again, you blind bloody fool? Raven reared back to strike him anew. Stop lying to yourself. Stop holding back. Her hand whipped toward his face and Naruto reacted accordingly. When she tried to slap him a second time, he caught her wrist and wrenched it over her head. Then he did the same to her free hand when she sought to hit him with that. Her knee kicked out at his groin in a fit of pique and he blocked it with his own, leaving her balanced on one heel. Weakness. Naruto capitalized on it and drove his head against hers in a vicious head, but sure enough he felt aura flare up as his skull struck hers. He didn't care. He headbutted her again and Raven reeled back with a hiss, momentarily stunned. From there he released her wrists and gave her a quick shove, sending her stumbling back towards the bed. This time Naruto chased her. You want me to stop? Fine. He roared. I'll stop. Raven surged upright and threw a wild haymaker at his head. Naruto ducked under her fist and stepped into her guard once more. Tan fingers locked around the spring maiden's throat, lifted her off her feet and slammed her back down into the mattress, enough force to make the bed jump. Not enough to hurt her, but to pin her all the same. A subtle tightening of his fingers caused her to go terribly still beneath him. She blinked up at him in naked surprise, red eyes wide and cheeks flushed, dark hair splayed out behind her like the wings of some fallen angel as her bosom heaved with heavy breath. There? The word escaped him in a growl as he peeled his hands away. You lost again. Happy now, just like that, the tension evaporated, replaced by something else entirely. If this is what losing to you feels like, maybe I wouldn't mind it so much. A different kind grin crept across Raven's face as he let her sit up. Aren't you going to claim your prize? No. Naruto pulled back. No matter how attractive she might be, he was beginning to realize Raven wasn't quite right in the head. She saw the world in a different way than most, and while that might not be a bad thing, there could be no denying that she'd done wrong in the past. He didn't trust her. Why not? She flounced upright and grabbed his hand, guiding it between her breasts. Forward this one. I want you to. Blue eyes narrowed to glowing azure slits. And I want you to let go. Don't you see? She did as asked, but now her pale hands rose to cup his whiskered cheeks instead. She leaned further back, twining her fingers in his hair to pull him atop her. This is what you're meant to be. A warrior. A conqueror. Why limit yourself? Her eyes narrowed as she crept closer still. Why dwell on the past? Why be less than what you truly are? Because I'm not like you. He swore, the words lacking their usual heat. I don't enjoy hurting people. Nor do I. Her lips brushed his, bringing with them the faint aroma of alcohol and rain. The latter surprised him. I take no pleasure in pain. I lead my tribe because I want to survive, because I must. I claimed the power of the Spring Maiden to keep it safe from Salem. Do I have regrets? Certainly. Raven looked away, and whatever fury she'd felt seemed to have vanished as surely as a spring storm now, taking her ire with it. But I won't dwell on them. Her gaze snapped back to his, eyes burning. The past is the past, and our mistakes make us who we are. It is not weakness to admit that, Naruto. Nor is it weakness to want someone. Honesty takes strength too. Compared to that, what's wrong with being a little selfish once in a while? Everything. Naruto broke free and pulled away. Blast it. She dragged him into another argument again. I have responsibilities. Name them then. She laid her hand atop his. Name one thing Ashbin hasn't forced on you or otherwise tricked you into. His jaw kept shut. Raven could have pounced on him in that moment, but she didn't. Last night you called me a coward. Instead she began speaking once more. And you were right. His head whipped around and he found a small, bitter smile waiting for him there. I spent the entire evening drinking any booze I could find, and when I couldn't drink any more, I cried myself to sleep. Pitiful, isn't it? She chuckled bitterly and dabbed at her face with the back of an arm. I'm the Spring Maiden. I'm told myself I was the strongest. Then you came along and crushed me in an instant, both physically and mentally. Sorry, Naruto wanted to say the word, but something held him back. And then you took me to task for what I did. You called me on the carpet for my CRP. You were right. She quivered, clutching her arms to herself. I'm afraid. I was always afraid of so many things. I lost everything because of that fear. Angry tears burned in her eyes. I threw away my own daughter. Barely held her in my arms for a day before I just ran away. That's unforgivable. Even if I went back to her now, even if I flung myself at her feet and begged forgiveness, nothing would change. Something hardened in her gaze. I'm not the same person I was back then. They're better off without me. I can't go back. I won't. A small, tiny sigh fled from her lips as she straightened to regard him. But I think you're afraid too. Raven contemplated him for a long moment. Not of me, not of Ashbin nor Salem, she amended when his eyes flashed, but of failure. You hold yourself to this golden standard and you're terrified of breaking it. Her hand ran over his, warm as lava glow. In that regard you're like me. We're both afraid, but we also have things we don't want to lose. Her fingers ran higher, seeking his face. That's why I'm going to help you get past this funk of yours. Relief crashed over him. Good, I'm also going to screw your brains out. Naruto choked on his own spit. I thought we were past this. Not a chance in hell. If you didn't want me, you would have walked away by now. No, a dark brow rose. But you haven't. You want to let go too, don't you? Some small part of you wants to know what it feels like. To just be free from all your worries and cares, if only for a little while. His silence must have spoke for him again, because she chided him with a small smile of her own. "Oh, you're not blushing. Not as naive as you looked then." Her sad smile took on a lascivious edge. "I know that look. You have kissed a woman before. Had several kisses stolen from me more like?" His tongue betrayed him for a second time. "Diamen Schnee. Schnee, wait, you mean that really was Winter Schnee you fought?" A sharp bark of laughter burst from the maiden as she slapped her knee. "I wasn't sure. Now that's a story I'd like to hear sometime. Half the world thinks she's a prude. Don't let her Ice Queen act fool you." Naruto couldn't quite keep the smile from his voice when he shook his head. "She's got daddy issues and an inferiority complex a mile wide. Lucky for you then that I'm not a Schnee." Raven tossed her hair. "I won't guilt someone into betting me. You tell me to stop and I'll stop." Naruto twitched. "Just like that?" "Yup." She turned to face him once more, and this time there could be no mistaking the hunger in her eyes, the way she pivoted her body so she was facing him fully. He'd changed Raven, he realized. In crushing her yesterday and taking her to ask for what she'd done, he'd altered the very nature of her being. Not in the way he'd intended or even wanted to, but he'd inadvertently aided her nonetheless. Somehow, knowing the reason behind it made things worse. So much worse. It meant she wasn't doing this to be cruel or even out of lust but because she cared. "Tell me to stop," Raven whispered as her forehead touched his own, her hands rising to caress his whiskered visage. "Tell me you don't want this." She shifted her hips against him, hooking a bare leg against his thigh to entrap him further still. "Say you don't want me. Go ahead. Speak the truth and I'll stop." Her head tilted just so to allow him better access if he but chose to indulge. "Say it." "I'm not attracted to you, Raven. I want nothing to do with you, Raven. Say those words and this will all be over." A pause followed. "Well, I'm listening. This is your last chance." Naruto tried to speak. He really truly did. For once in his life, words failed him. No, he realized. Words had got him into this mess in the first place. If he'd simply defeated Raven and left, he wouldn't have this problem. Instead, he'd knocked some sense into her. Both figuratively and literally. Now she had her sights set on him and him alone. Raven didn't mock him for his silence, she simply leaned in, pressing her lips to his. Naruto inhaled sharply through his nose, eyes widening in surprise. Her mouth was warm and the embrace surprisingly gentle. Downright chaste even. Not at all angry as Winter had been, and with none of the primal ferocity he might have expected from a bandit. Raven kissed him as a lover might, tongue parting his lips, questing for entrance, arms lazily twining around his neck as she pulled him down to her bed. She made no effort to tear at his clothes or rip the fabric from his flesh. He was glad she didn't. He didn't trust his control to hold if she did. This was wrong, wasn't it, and yet it felt so right. "Just let go," she breathed between kisses. "Stop thinking so damn much and relax for once in your life." At the end of the day, Naruto Uzumaki was only human and there was only so much the human body could take without going mad. When her hips straddled his and began to move, his self-control slipped, longing breached the surface with a vengeance. He grabbed Raven by the waist and surged up to meet her. She met him halfway, fingers tangling in his hair as his hands brushed against her rear. She made a tiny noise of appreciation into his mouth and crushed her mouth against his again. He hardly knew the first thing when it came to kissing, moving on instinct and nothing else. Raven proved a patient lover. "See, isn't this nice?" she purred, grinding against the fabric of his pants as his hands came up to rest on her breasts. No anger. No stress. No complicated feelings. Just a nice good lay. It was. Naruto loathed admitting it, but there was some semblance of truth to be had in Raven's words. Even with his clothes on and her hands on him, his mind felt almost pleasantly blank for once. Her body was warm to the touch and the little sound she made set his very blood on fire. When he accidentally bit Raven's lip, she cried out and recoiled, not in pain or surprise, but sheer delight. Red eyes flashed with flame as she reared back. A sudden breeze tore through the tent and for a fleeting sliver of a second she almost reminded him of an angry goddess, an avatar of pure destruction ready to scour the world clean. The sight stirred something strange in him and those bloody red orbs burned brighter yet still. Her hand settled on his chest and tore his jacket away, exposing the scarred plane of his chest to her wanting gaze. For a long moment, the spring maiden didn't speak, she simply stared at his scars, eyes dark with lust. "What?" Naruto pushed himself up on the points of his elbows. "Something wrong?" "No, it's nothing." Raven elked her bloody lip clean and shook her head, ebony hair swaying in the breeze. "For what it's worth, I'm glad I met you. Also, one more thing." Naruto tilted his head. Raven's eyes burned like the sun. "Hope you aren't too attached to those pants." Then she descended upon him anew and Naruto had no more time for any traitorous thoughts. The world came back to Naruto quickly as he realized what he'd done. Blue eyes stared up at the cloth ceiling of the tent, blinking slowly as comprehension dawned. He'd woken only a few minutes ago to find himself tired and sore, almost pleasantly so. Warm too. At first he wasn't even sure how much time had passed although sunlight still spilled into the tent. It was higher than before, suggesting morning had long since been left behind. Afternoon then. They'd been out for hours. It should have alarmed him. Instead he felt content. Sated even. All the stress and anxiety he'd built up over the last few days, yeah, that was gone now. He couldn't even remember why he'd been so irritated in the first place. But his mind and the warm body nestled against him wouldn't allow him to forget his actions. How could he, her hips on his, their fingers intertwined, her back arching as she cried out his name? Naruto sputtered and shook his head, dispelling the flash of memory. Well, he blew out a sigh. That happened. Only then did he dare look down. In sleep, Raven Branwen looked almost normal as she spooned against him. Dare he say cute it was. Strong to believe this woman was capable of flattening forests, calling down thunderstorms, turning the world to ice, or summoning raging flames hot enough to char flesh. Maidens were truly a terrifying thing indeed. Her powers were probably even greater than Amber's. And wasn't that a little worrying? He might be able to best Raven in a fight, but this woman, this monster would make mincemeat of anyone else. Red eyes fluttered open to meet his. Blinked, widened, narrowed as she awakened and remembered where she was. Her body coiled for a moment, then relaxed when she recognized him. A lazy smile followed. Morning, she pushed herself up to embrace his cheek. What time is it? Afternoon probably, he surmised. Ugh. Of sunlight found her face and the bandit hid her head in the crook of his shoulder to avoid it. Forget I asked. They lay there in companionable silence for a moment more before Naruto finally found his voice. It wasn't merely a matter of mustering the nerve to speak. His body wanted nothing more than to laze about, but he knew Raven would take advantage of that. He refused to allow it. So, he began awkwardly. That was nice. Don't be such a wuss. Raven elbowed him. It's just section. We had fun. Maybe we'll do it again. Doesn't have to mean anything. You're feeling better now, aren't you? His expression betrayed him. Good. Raven laid a scorching embrace on his lips. Then I've done my job. If you're trying to manipulate me, his voice rose in a warning as she pulled away, it won't work. Manipulate you? Raven settled against him. I'm no fool. If I tried to push you now, I wouldn't stand a chance. Your choices are your own. Try through. He might to ignore it. Naruto felt like what they'd done really should mean something to him. Amber's face flashed in his mind's eye and he fought down a mild wince. He wasn't with her. Shouldn't matter. It still felt like a betrayal. He might feel better now, but for some reason he couldn't quite ease the sting of regret in his chest. How am I going to explain this? He wondered. Please don't. Kurama muttered. It was strong enough ignoring the two you. Just pretend it didn't happen. That's what I'll be doing. Hey, fat load of good you were. Raven laid another embrace on his neck. You know, you weren't half bad yourself for a. Naruto couldn't quite hide the muscle that jumped in his jaw. How did she know? In defiance of that very statement, the battered bed frame broke beneath them and nearly sent them tumbling down to the floor. Heat rose in Raven's cheeks at having been caught out, turning her pale skin scarlet as he looked on. It almost made her look girlish. Never mind what he just said, he was going to milk this to kingdom come. A blonde brow rose. You were saying, fine. Raven laughed. You were wonderful. Now help me with my hair, would you? It's always a mess after this. Numb fingers helped lift those ebony tresses until she could find a L-teacher strip and begin to wrap them into a ponytail once more. Her hair wasn't just long, it was heavy, having weight and volume both. How could she stand it? Kurama saw it first. Oh. Naruto noticed it a heartbeat later himself. At such an angle he couldn't help but see the scars on Raven's bare back. They were impossible to ignore. There were more than a few of them, and pity stirred in his heart before he could think to stomp it down. Judging by the marks and the stretching, it looked like a Grim had caught here or several. But those didn't look like claw marks. What were they? Like what you see? A red eye peered over her shoulder. How did you get this injury? The words escaped him before he could hold them back. Which 1 inch? She smirked. Raven. Oh, you mean those? Grim attacked the tribe when I was little. She continued to bind her hair as he balked. An Ursa went after Crow. I pushed him out of the way. Diamond thing nearly bit me in half. How? He asked. He was my baby brother. I couldn't let him die. No, not that, he muttered. I mean, how are you still alive? Rage is a hell of an anesthetic, When the query didn't satisfy him, her shoulders rose and fell in a shrug. I don't know. Everything was hazy for a while after that. My wounds got infected. Those eerie red eyes took on a distant look as she told her tale. I slipped in and out of consciousness for days at a time. I didn't think I'd survive, then one day I woke and my injuries were healed. He offered her a fresh strip and she ruthlessly bound her hair within that as well. Crow told me a doctor passed through and tended to me, but whoever they were, I never saw them. Curiosity reared its head. Someone who could mend wounds like that must have been in high demand back then. He get a good look at them, not really? Raven finished binding her hair and gave it a final shake before turning to face him. Like I said, we were little back then. He told me they wore a golden cloak with black markings. That was about it. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Kurama hissed. That shouldn't be possible. What? Naruto turned his attention inward. Do you have something? I have a suspicion. Ask me later. Focusing once more, he turned his attention outward. You were brave for a kid. And now I'm not. She preened and clenched one hand into a fist. I survived. I got stronger. Now no Grim will ever touch me again. His hand twitched toward hers almost before he realized it. Naruto snatched it back. No. He couldn't feel empathy for Raven. If he did, he'd be lost. We don't have to get up, you know. She flopped down beside him. Red eyes found his. Stay. There's no reason to rush. For better or worse, you're in charge now. Those idiots have to listen to you whether they like it or not. She took his hand in hers and kissed it. We could have breakfast in bed. No. He'd played her game long enough. If he stayed, if he allowed himself to get attached, bad things would happen. A dark part of Naruto wanted to indulge again. He'd gotten a taste of her and hungered for more. This time he didn't let it rule him. He reined his emotions in ruthlessly. If Amber saw him like this, the reminder gave Naruto the kick in the butt he needed. He tugged his hand away. That's enough. Stop. He placed his hands on Raven's shoulders and sat up, pushing her back to arm's length. He held her there when she struggled. We're done here. If you say so. She hummed as he kicked away the sheets and clambered to his feet. Here. She leaned over and dipped a hand into a nearby chest, then tossed him a tattered red shirt and a pair of dark slacks. I've still got some of Crow's old clothes lying around. These should be about your size. He accepted them quickly, then the silver jacket she flung at him. She considered him a moment longer as he dressed himself. You look good in those colors. Maybe you should keep them, maybe I will. We'll talk later. Quick as a flash, he choked down a snarky comment, dressed himself and summoned another pair of clones to prevent her pursuit. Keep an eye on her. He snapped at them as he marched away. She doesn't leave the tent until Amber and the others get here. A pause as he considered her earlier actions. And make sure she puts on some more clothes, damn it. Raven blew an embrace at his back. See you later, sweet cheeks. Heat seared up Naruto's neck and he pivoted on one heel with such force that he kicked up dust in his wake. Red widened in surprise as he stormed back to her. Full lips quirked in a smirk, parting to offer some barbed retort or another. Naruto crushed his mouth against hers before she could speak it. Her lips parted for him with a mon and he slammed her back against the tent's sole wooden beam, kissing her roughly wand with reckless abandon. He pinned her when she struggled. When his passion came howling back, so too did he pour it into her. She bit his lip and in return he utilized every trick he'd learned in the last few hours, hands gliding over her body, lips meeting hers time and again, until she was mewling and gasping for mercy under his grasp. He took her to the edge, absolute absurd, and then he pulled away. Raven's eyes widened in outrage. Don't you dare. See you later. He snapped off a snarky salute as his clones restrained her. Naruto didn't gloat. That would have been beneath him. Instead he reveled in the dumbstruck look Raven wore. He carved it into his mind as he stomped away, and this time, Raven had no retort for him when he left her to her own devices. The last word was his. He'd never forgot the startled look on her face. Part of him preened. He'd never speak the words aloud, but it had felt damned good to put the spring maiden in her place there at the end. Right, you've got a mean streak when you're angry. Remind me not to PSS you off. Shame and satisfaction pooled in the blonde's stomach as he stormed off, leaving him feeling vaguely ill, yet also strangely satisfied. He'd given in. Lost himself to his own desires. Raven had been the one to tempt him, sure, but in the end he had given in. And yet, his mind had never felt more alive. Troubling that. There you are. I heart shouting. Vernal was quick to jog up to him when he left Raven's tent. She didn't run, almost sounded like she'd expected it to. Naruto stalked past her, forcing the girl to hustle just to keep up with him. Nope. She stayed. She saw his expression and wrinkled her nose. Did something happen? Nope. He kept right on walking. But it sounded like nope. In his haste to change the subject, he searched for a distraction and found one in the repaired walls. His clones had done good work last night. Under Gregor's watchful eye, they'd rebuilt the wooden palisade completely overnight and improved it beside. He wasn't much of a craftsman, but he could see where a good portion of metal wrapped around the walls, strengthening them still further. All told, the camp looked sturdy, stronger than it had ever been. Warchief. Gregor grunted as he drew near. Your boys did good work. We finished only an hour ago. Silver eyes flicked over them and noted the lack of a certain swordswoman. What is to be done with the defeated? I trust she didn't give you too much trouble. Something in the way he said that word pricked at Naruto's heart. It was almost too easy to slip back into the facade he'd worn last night. Painfully so. He'd have to watch that. Kakashi had once told him of rogue shinobi who went undercover and lost themselves in their role. He wasn't about to do that. Don't cast her out. She's under my protection until I say otherwise. He spoke clearly and firmly, waiting for an argument. It never came. It is your right to claim her as yours. Instead he received a grim nod. She'll give you a strong son. Naruto felt a sudden surge of heat rise to his cheeks as his urns began to burn all over again. Claim son. He'd said no such thing. He was far, far, far too young to be parent. In desperation he flicked a look back to Vernal. Poor girl looked ill. He didn't blame her. That'll be all, he had to force the words through clenched teeth. Vernal and I will be leaving for a few days. We're taking Raven with us. You're in charge until we return. You will be done. The man slammed a fist against his chest. We will bring the fight to the enemy wherever we find them. Naruto spun away quickly, leaving Vernal to trot after him. You're not going to have Akid with Raven, right? She gestured crudely. Not a chance in hell, he whispered. I'd sooner feed myself to the grim than do that. Oh. Oddly enough, his remark seemed to soothe the little bandit more than it should have. Good. We're leaving soon then, yup. He mussed her hair, grinning when she scowled and flailed at him. Soon as Amber and Crow get here, a distant whine caught his attention and he craned his neck towards the sound. There. He spied a distant speck of something on the horizon, one that grew steadily larger the longer he looked at it. Soon enough he realized it wasn't a bird, but a bullhead. He watched it bob and weave erratically in the air like some inebriated fowl and had a sneaking suspicion about its pilot. That's them, yeah. Vernal tilted her head to follow his gaze. Your family. His first instinct was to deny it, and the second to ask where in blazes she had gotten that idea. Crow was worse than a drunken sailor half the time, and he'd not made the best impression. Then he thought of Amber, the tears in her eyes, the small shy smile she'd granted him that night. At least she had a good head on her shoulders, unlike a certain bird. Family, huh? He scratched the back of his head with a smile. Yeah, guess she is. Vernal didn't get a chance to ask again as the craft began its descent. The tribe reacted accordingly. Of course, women looked up and pointed. Children gasped and asked what the strange metal bird was. Men reached for their weapons. Still more didn't give in a damn once they realized it was but a single craft and not a fleet from Haven come to wipe them off the face of the map. Naruto felt a dopey grin spread across his whiskered face. Of course it wasn't. They'd flown clear across Vale to get here. He wished they would have arrived sooner. Before the pilot could come in for a proper landing, a lone figure ripped open the plane's doors, leaped into the open air and plummeted toward the ground. That drew a different sort of attention. Vernal squawked at his side. Are they mad? Wait for it. Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder to steady her. Despite his own words, he couldn't help but take a step forward. His caution proved unnecessary a moment later as he watched the falling figure right themselves at the last moment. They reared back and slammed into the ground fist first, bending their knees to absorb the impact of their entrance, kicking up a cloud of earthy dust. Someone clapped in the distance. Naruto joined them. It was an entrance among entrances, a dynamic landing that would have made Mike Guy proud. And so the best girl returns. Kurama chipped in. Ha! A joyful chuckle slipped past his lips in agreement. Classic superhero landing. That's just like Amber. With a rush of hot air, the bullhead touched down in the wake left behind by the fall maiden. Naruto took his hand from Vernal's shoulder and strode forward to greet Amber, leaving his apprentice pupil student to try and make sense of it all as she followed in his happy footsteps. That joy vanished when Amber raised her gaze and stood. Watery eyes found him. Naruto Uzumaki. The resultant shout nearly caused him to jump out of his skin. You've got some explaining to do. Right now. Alright, that's fair. The Jinchuriki raised his hands to ward off her anger. I'm sure you're angry and I'm sorry, Whipped. Vernal swung her hand and mimed a cracking sound. Breath burst from Naruto's lungs as Amber's head slapped into his chest. He found himself instinctively planting one foot in the ground to prevent the excitable girl from bowling him over. His arms settled around her waist and her own came around to clutch his back tightly. Amber burrowed her face deeper into his blazer, uncaring for the scene she made. Don't you ever do that again. He felt a strange dampness on his chest. I was worried sick. How could you? Well, it's not like I wanted to, no. She smacked his arm weakly. Not allowed. Her blue eyes fluttered open and shut in a rapid series of blinks. Never. Again. When he looked down, angry tears glimmered up at him, fanned by golden flames burning in her eyes. Something in him wilted. She looked so small, fragile, as if a single harsh word would shatter her completely. He sighed and planted a hand against his forehead. All right. It felt like betraying a part of himself, but he uttered the word anyway, if only for her sake. I won't run off like that again. She granted him a weak smile. Good. We're partners, right? We have to look out for each other. So, you two gonna embrace or what? A familiar voice called. Amber seemed to shrink in his arms. Uncle Crow. What, I've got money riding on the two of you. Naruto felt his face turn crimson, but he thought he hid it well. He wasn't at all surprised to find Crow Branwen sauntering down the bullhead's ramp toward them. Gone was the man's self-same smile, replaced by a look of pure steel. There was a storm brewing there, one he knew he'd have to face if he wanted to continue his journey. Who's the runt? He squinted down at Vernal. You lost or something, kid? Die, traitor? Her boot scythed into his shin with an audible crunch. The impact alone made Crow recoil even with aura, and left him hopping up and down on one foot. Why? And who's this? Amber peeked at her. She's adorable. Vernal scowled and wound up for another kick. She skinned my student. Naruto intervened before she could strike Amber's knee. It's a long story. Yeah, I'm sure it's real interesting. But let's get down to business. Crow favored them with a black look as he cradled his leg. How in blazes did you get these bastards to listen to you? Strength? Venal Shirpid. That's not the way I'd put it. Naruto muttered. Why not? Little Vernal interjected again with the guilelessness only a child could possess. Raven brought him here. He didn't like that, so he started knocking heads together until she came back. They argued. Her arms flailed as though to mime an explosion. Then they fought each other. He kicked her butt and made her his beach. Tribe doesn't listen to her anymore, 'cause of that. Easy, right? All right. Amber growled. Easy, Crow guffawed. You didn't tell us about that. And you didn't tell me about Salem. Naruto retorted instantly. Funny how that works. What in the who told you about her? Crow hissed as the good mood died a horrible, choking death. Raven, never mind. He shook his head before Naruto could hope to answer. You're needed back in Beacon. There's been another attack. We only just found out about it on our way here. It's not safe. Ashbin can answer your questions there. Beacon sounds like the worst place to be right about now. Naruto disagreed. I need to go to Haven anyway. I want to use the relic there. Amber blinked. What relic? Crow's face turned ashen. Ray told you about that too. You two can't go to Haven. Absolutely not. Naruto pounced on the words. Crow hadn't said you too, which seemed to imply that Amber was quite content with visiting Mistral's academy. He wasn't sure why that relieved him so much, only that it did. Raven had already made the less than pleasant suggestion that she was working with Ashbin to deceive him. This meant she was blameless in this unless Crow was a very good liar. Which he wasn't. Amber looked just as surprised as he felt at the moment. You can't stop us. He crossed both arms before his chest and stood his ground. We're gonna use that relic with or without you. You're right. Crow smacked his lips. I can't stop you. But I can warn you. Us won't be happy about this. And why should we care what some old man thinks? Kurama snapped. Naruto bit back a growl of his own. I don't know. Ashbin spit. He slashed a hand through the air between them. I'm going. With or without your help. Crow grimaced and ran a hand through his hair. He keeps secrets for a reason, you know. A vein pulsed in Naruto's temple. Allies don't keep secrets from each other. Crow's mouth opened and Seoked shut, hesitant to provoke him any further. Naruto knew why. They'd already fought once before, and while it had not been a life or death bout, the old bird hadn't been the one to emerge victorious in that little scuffle. Naruto had deliberately held back the lion's share of his strength in their duel. Now he had Amber at his side, and judging by the way the Fall Maiden was scowling at her precious uncle, If Crow tried to stop him now, well, they both knew what would happen. So the bleary bird chose another path. I don't like this. I'm calling Oz. Crow, no. Amber grabbed at his arm. Don't. He'll overreact. Naruto's heart went terribly still. Listen to her, Crow. Not a chance. I'm putting a stop to the blonde moved. Even as Crow withdrew his scroll from the pocket of his trousers, he stepped in and launched a kunai at the phone. It flew straight and true, knocking the device from the old bird's hand and causing him to jerk backward in the same moment. Naruto ignored his startled cry, tracking the flailing scroll with his eyes. The very second it struck the ground, he blurred toward it, reared back, and stomped down with all his might. Metal and plastic buckled beneath his boot and the device died with a metallic crunch. What was that for? I'm sorry. No, he wasn't. Not at all. You were going to ruin everything. Listen to yourself. Crow flung up a hand. You don't even know how to use the DMN relic, never mind Jin. All eyes turned toward the voice as Raven emerged from her tent, thankfully clothed this time, favoring her right leg as she stalked forward. She limped towards them, red eyes flashing in the afternoon sun. Her name is Jin. She clarified once again, much to Crow's horror. You'll need to speak the genie's name when you retrieve the lamp from the vault. There should be at least 2 questions left. Raven, Vernal, go pack the rest of your things. She barked. We're leaving. Don't have to listen to you. The little bandit huffed and stomped a foot. Naruto's the boss now, not you. Why, Naruto? Raven's smile reminded him of a shark. How kind of you not to tell me you stole my apprentice out from under me? Go on. Naruto reassured her. We'll still be here when you get back. Vernal didn't need to be told twice. She skedaddled. For once in his life, Naruto was actually glad for Raven's interruption, if not the bloody glower she'd levered at him. Crow's hand had been inching toward Harbinger's hilt for some time now, but the moment he laid eyes on his sister, he froze. His eyes strayed to her leg, fell back to Naruto, then found her leg again. When Raven moved to stand behind him, however, those bleary orbs locked onto the Jinchuriki with the intensity of a heat-seeking missile. What did you do to her? He croaked. By contrast, Amber's reaction proved decidedly more visceral. Now that she'd finally found a chance to get a word in, she looked near vicious with blinding rage. You no good filthy kidnapper. Her eyes blazed gold as she rose several inches off the ground. I should strike you down where you stand. You're more than welcome to try. Raven flashed her a saccharine smile and mirrored the motion. Finally ready to fight now, are you? No fighting. Naruto bodily yanked them both down before they could come to blows. None of that. We're on the same side. Raven obeyed easily enough and turned away with a huff. Yet again Amber proved herself far more stubborn. She jerked out of his grasp and skittered backward as if she'd been burned. The sheer pain behind those hazel eyes hit him like a physical force. You're working together, her fists edged helplessly at her sides. No, that can't be true. Don't tell me she converted you. Of course not. Naruto countered quickly, causing her eyes to dim. We've formed a temporary alliance. She's going to open the vault in Haven for us. Is that what this is all about? Crow bridled. What's so DMN important to you that you're willing to piss us Ashbin off? I want to know the truth. He saw no reason to lie. Why should he? About my home and what he's hiding. Depending on the answers I receive, I might more questions for the man himself. When that didn't placate the older hunter any, he offered a shrug. I'm not condemning anyone and I'm not taking anyone's side, but I need answers. I don't like being left in the dark. A thought occurred to him just then and he rounded on Raven. Say, what happens when all those questions are used up anyway? The spring maiden finally unbent enough to look at him again. Supposedly the relic refills itself every 100 years or so. Crow whistled while Amber squeaked in surprise. Wait, really? That's a thing? Has never told me about that. Raven flashed him a pitying look. He didn't tell you a lot of things, brother? And Naruto he all but grinned. That was good news. No, more than good news. Great news. He admittedly knew next to nothing about Salem and her intentions, but Raven had all but warned him that this Queen of the Grim wanted to actively collect the relics and use them against humanity. A glorified paperweight wasn't going to do her any good, not when it was stripped of its powers for a century. See, a winning smile lit his face. Everyone wins. Once it's used up, it'll be a worthless hunk of metal. Even if this Salem person gets her hands on it, she won't be able to use it. For a while, sure. Raven touched a finger to her chin. It'll definitely pisses her off. And you trust him with a relic? Crow stabbed a finger at Naruto. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? More than I trust Ashbin. Her smile returned tenfold. I trust his strength. Besides, he's taking responsibility for his actions. I say give him a chance. The old bird frowned. What's this about responsibility now? Amber's smile was brittle. Yes, by all means. Elaborate. Raven. Naruto blew out a sigh. I hate you so much right now. Can't you just portal us there or something? Can't? She shook her head firmly. I don't have a bond anywhere near Haven. We'll have to travel the old-fashioned way. Then we'll use Amber's ship. Naruto retaliated, mind already whirring as he stalked toward the weathered craft. Come on, let's go. We don't have any time to waste. He snapped his fingers when Raven was the only one to follow him. Come on. We'll wait for Vernal, but then we're out of here. Chop chop, people. Now hold on just a minute, Whiskers. Crow shouted at his back. We're not done here. Yes. A blue eye flashed over his shoulder. We are. You coming or not? Can I say something? Amber tugged at his sleeve and his resolve nearly came undone. Hear her out. Kurama chimed. Can't you see she's torn up about this? Now that he looked at her, he could see that she was. Her shoulders were trembling. How had he missed that? Too want to trust Ashbin. She stood her ground as Naruto looked on, and with each passing moment, the wayward Shinobi felt himself grow tense. But I'm with you. Her eyes met his. I trust you. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Just like that, an invisible weight fled from his shoulders. Yet she wasn't finished. You're still you, right? She gave him a once-over, frowning at his new clothes as though he were a different person. You won't use the questions for anything bad, will you? Nope. He smacked his lips. Not a chance. You have my word. Then I'm going with you. Her eyes hardened. Don't think for a second that I'll stay here. It was just the sort of thing he'd expected her to say. Her smile lit burned away the dread he'd been feeling. Thanks. Thoughtlessly he closed the distance between them and grasped her hand in his. I really didn't want to do this without you. Don't mention it. Amber threaded her fingers within his hand held tight. Just don't leave, alright? You said we were partners. You promised? Naruto's heart twisted in his chest. Yeah. I said that, didn't I? I'll never go back on my word. Behind his back, Naruto heard Raven whistle. He risked a glance back at her just in time to see Amber flash her an odd look that swore there would be words later, but for now she held her tongue. And wasn't that just the conversation he was looking forward to? Then I guess we're flying there. Crow groaned, completely missing the byplay between the three of them. Someone needs to chaperone you three. This from the resident drunkard. Raven arched a dark brow. You're the one who needs a chaperone. Not us. And that's assuming your semblance doesn't act up again. Amber seconded. Are you even sober right now? Naruto tilted his head. Hey, I'm not that bad. In defiance of those very words, the bullhead gave an ominous shudder behind them. All eyes turned toward it with dread, and Naruto finally noticed just how battered the craft really was. Crow and Amber had pushed the little ship well beyond its limits to make it to Mistral. Portions of the wings were twisted and melted, and the casing looked to have cracked in multiple places. Frankly, it was a miracle the plane had made it here at all. Its smoldering frame looked fit to collapse at any moment. A faintly familiar scent reached his nose. Naruto paused, inhaled, frowned. Why do I smell smoke? Crow tugged at his collar. It's probably nothing. The bullhead folded like a house of cards. Amber made a keening noise. Uncle Crow. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, it's so nice to finally meet someone like me. I'm nothing like you. You're a psychopath. And you will be too. Banter. Long live the maiden's tap. Winter kicked her foot impatiently. Tap, tap. The noise echoed through the hull of the battleship, a steady sound that would have driven many a man mad. It bounded off the walls, struck the ceiling, hit the floor and kept going. Some of the guards began to twitch. A good number wore vacant expressions, suggesting their minds had long since flown this mortal coil in search of a happier place. And still the noise persisted, growing steadily louder with each passing instant. Yet for all the torture and torment, no one dared to utter a word. To do so would only lead to an icy demise. Tup, tup, tup. General James Ironwood barely batted an eyelash as he thumbed through the messages on his scroll. Unlike his men, he remained unaffected. He'd long since grown inured to the unusual spectacle that was Winter losing her temper. For make no mistake, rare though it might be, this was the Schnee definition of a tantrum. It was almost sad, really. He knew his subordinate was cross. One had but to look at her face to know her emotions. Those pale blue eyes were akin to frigid blocks of ice now, much like her namesake rather than the gentle azure skies. Her mouth was set in a grim line, her posture a touch too stiff for her given profession. The specialist hadn't uttered so much as a word for hours now, and all their staff knew why. Winter Schnee did not take rejection well, much less being stood up by a potential date. Ironically, it hadn't been a part of her mission at all. Naruto had crashed through her barriers and in doing so caught her eye. She tried to take what she wanted by force as Jacques had before her, only for it to blow up in her face. Silly girl. She still had much to learn. It would be remiss of him to say otherwise. That was to be expected, he supposed. Despite her age, Winter was in many ways still a child at heart, if only because she hadn't had much of a childhood to begin with. Jacques had battered and berated her at every turn, all but denying her any true chance at a normal life, so much so that she joined the military, joined him, just to escape her father's grasp. Atlas was many things, but it was no place for a little girl. Winter had been forced to grow up fast, mentally and physically alike. Considering his scroll anew, he blew out a sigh. Don't leave Vale yet. Ashbin's request read. I need you here. With that request and Naruto herring off in Mistral thanks to Raven's interference, they had little choice left but to wait for his and Amber's return before they could proceed. Assuming Crow managed to return in one piece without disaster following in his wake. Best be wary of that one semblance. Bad luck was a powerful thing in its own right, just as much as its counterpart. Now there was a thought. He'd have to introduce him to Clover sometime. More to the point, he'd be having words with a certain young man when he came back to Bale. He didn't bear Naruto Uzumaki any ill will, of course, nor could it be called his fault. No, he didn't hate Naruto Uzumaki. He simply wanted to talk to him. Loudly. Repeatedly. With his gun. He would recover probably. The boy had already demonstrated a remarkable healing factor, if nothing else. He'd be fine. That wasn't the parent in him talking. No, not at all. Winter's tapping reached a crescendo, becoming an angry, constant source of noise. Finally, his tongue betrayed him. He stood you up, didn't he? Permission to speak freely, Sir, Winter inquired. His brow quirked. Granted, specialist cold eyes fl-ked his way. Shut up. Ironwood stifled a small smile as he went back to his work. He cared for Winter like the daughter he'd never had, but she really needed to get out more. Even her talks with Freya back in Atlas were a painful, stilted thing. Perhaps that was her upbringing showing through. Winter only knew one way to live. She'd get better in time. It wasn't as if she could get any worse. If anything, he found himself amazed Winter had a crush. It was almost too incredible to be true. She hadn't seemed the sort. Why choose the boy? He asked into the silence that followed. For what it's worth, I saw the footage. Winter's pale face turned scarlet and her eyes swept away. Is that an order, Sir? Ironwood ached an eyebrow. I didn't have the words for it. Her eyes swept away and down, seeking refuge in the floor tiles. He treated me like a person. Not a Schnee, not a Solider, but a person. He called me on the carpet for my CRP when no one else would. Sir. She added after only a moment's hesitation. He was brave. Bold. Fearless. I wanted that. Something hardened in her gaze. And then he vanished without so much as a word. James knew he could have left it at that. All he had to do was hold his tongue and the bridge between these two would be burned. Maybe he should have. Yet for some reason he felt the need to defend the boy. No, that wasn't it. Try as he might, his longing for Winter's happiness overrode his instinctive drive to protect her from herself. He was going to regret this, wasn't he? To be fair, the general raised a finger. He was kidnapped by a known criminal. Neither of you could have accounted for something like that. Even Ashbin and I were unprepared. That's not. Her stance softened as she considered his words. I suppose you're right. Still, to think that it would be the Spring Maiden, yes, Amber did well to uncover her identity. Ironwood steepled his fingers, hiding a small smile behind them as his specialist bridled. Raven Branwen is well known to us, though I expect her loyalties had shifted by now. We'll have to see about offering her sanctuary. Her power needs to be protected. Winter ground her teeth. James resisted the urge to sigh. I could send you after them, you know. He ventured into the silence that followed. I'm sure they'd appreciate some air support. It might be too late for that, but surely the gesture would mean something. Moreover, it might allow Winter to make a better impression than her last. If you like, I can have a bullhead prepped in 5 minutes with a full company of soldiers. Sure enough, Winter's brow furrowed. That won't be necessary, i.e. Without warning, her words peaked into a startled yelp and her entire body convulsed from head to toe. James shot out of his chair as she pitched forward, collapsing onto her hands and knees. The shaking didn't stop, if anything it only grew worse. A silent, keening gasp forced itself between the specialist's teeth. Winter. He laid a hand on her shoulder, turning her to face him. What's wrong? Why did you? Glowing blue eyes rose to meet his, brimming with confusion and wild azure flames. Ironwood jerked back, feeling scalded by them. No, that wasn't it. Shouldn't be possible. It didn't make a LCK of sense. Spring and fall were accounted for, and summer was a known variable. Their own maiden was secure in Atlas. And yet winter was showing all the signs. An ugly pang of dread stirred in him as he beheld a thin film of frost elking at the floor. Only one maiden held such mastery over ice. Sir Winter whispered. What's happening? He barely heard her. His mind and semblance were already whirling to find answers. Freya. Had to be. She'd been in poor health when he'd last seen her, but the doctors had assured him she would make a full recovery by the end of the week. It was all too soon. Too sudden. She must have perished. Be it through old age, accident, or perhaps a more untimely end. She'd passed on. Winter must have been the final woman in her memory as they'd planned, yet to see her burning eyes, to know that the torch had been passed. Had she been killed? Was Atlas under attack? Too many questions. Not enough answers. The Winter Maiden was dead. Long live the new maiden. Already he could feel the beginnings of a migraine coming on. Wherever he was, he prayed the boy was having better luck than them. The journey to Haven should have been a blur. It wasn't. Crow set what he thought was a blistering pace, yet time and time again Amber found herself nearly outrunning him. Naruto proved even worse, if only because she knew how quickly he could move. More than once, she caught him visibly grinding his teeth as he forced himself to slow down and keep pace with them. She shot him an exasperated look and he shrugged. It was a rushed, frantic thing, if only because they knew they didn't have the time for anything else. The enemy might learn the truth at any given moment, discover their plans and undo them. So when Naruto began to lengthen his stride, she unknowingly did the same. Within moments they began to break ahead of the group. Crow growled and tried to keep pace with them, but he had no supernatural powers to rely on, and soon his stamina began to flag. Raven and Vernal were worse, one for her injuries and the other her youth. Amber tried to not begrudge them, she really did. But it was strong. So strong not to simply cut loose and race to their destination. To their future. Their fate. Why walk when you could run? Better yet, why run when you could fly? There was no need to conceal her power anymore, and her gifts ached to be used. If the enemy Salem knew who she was, then there was little point in hiding it now. She didn't even realize they were leaving them behind until someone called out. Teacher, slow down. Vernal whined as she jogged after them. You're going too fast. Oh, just go ahead already. Crow stumbled to a halt with a rasp and laid both hands on his knees. Freaking kids these days. You can see Haven from here. Can't miss it. He pointed to the looming spires in the distance. Ask for Lionheart when you get there. Raven and Meal catch up with you. He fed them both an anxious glance. Just don't do anything stupid, alright? Naruto hesitated. Vernal. Crow saw it. I'll keep an eye on your brat, alright? What? Said girl sputtered. No. I don't want anything to do with Vernal. She stiffened. Yes, teacher. Damn it, I told you not to call me that. A curious flush overtook the blonde's whiskered visage, but he mastered himself. I need you to stay with Crow for now. Why? She challenged immediately. Because I've got a bad feeling about this. Come on, don't make that face. Even as he said the words, Vernal stomped a foot. Thin arms folded before her chest, and an almost mulish expression stole over her face. Naruto was quick with his counter. I'll teach you a super secret move once this mess is over, alright? Just like that, her eyes lit up. Promise? Yup. He reached down to tousle her. Wait. Amber's gaze slid to Raven. Why can't she come ahead with us? If you must know, the Spring Maiden grimaced and rolled her right shoulder. I still haven't fully recovered. Even those words seemed to gall her, forced from somewhere deep inside herself. My aura's still lower than I'd like. I'm at less than half. Not gonna be much use in a fight. She was lying. She had to be. Don't be such a coward. I'm not, the warrior huffed at her. I'm being practical. Right now, I'm vulnerable. I don't agree with her. Much to Amber's chagrin, Naruto stepped up beside her. But she's telling the truth. She isn't at peak strength right now. And how do you know that? A blonde brow rose. Because I was the one that beat her black and blue. Amber flinched at the words, even as Raven preened. They wounded her more than she cared to admit. When had they become so close? Still animosity to be sure, but the pair weren't openly snapping at one another as she expected they might. There were questions there, questions that needed to be asked, but she dare not give voice to them for fear of what answers she might find. Instead she rounded on her partner. What makes you so sure? Sixth sense. The blonde replied readily, tapping a finger to his skull. She's not putting out any negative emotions right now. See, Raven Seek had one hip in her direction, clear sign of defiance. If it makes you feel any better, you can't trust me, but you can trust me to do what's in my best interests. Vernal scratched the back of her head. The hell does that mean? It means she won't run. Crow muttered. If she does, she knows her days are numbered. Raven shot him a scowl. Don't muddy the waters. I'm working with you lot and I'm not going to stab you in the back. Isn't that enough? Naruto clearly didn't trust her and neither did she, but there could be no denying that they needed her. And she needed them. Like it or not, they were all in the same boat right now. If the alternative meant Raven going to Salem or worse, having the maiden power ripped out of her and given to that beach from before Ino. Amber swallowed her dislike and choked down her hatred. They would work with her. For now. After all, she needed answers, answers only the lamp could provide. All at once a sharp, sudden tune pierced the air and ran out among them to startle everyone. 4 pairs of eyes rounded on the sound. On her. Amber's gaze dipped to her hip pocket and the vibrating scroll there. Against her better judgment, she plucked it free and held it aloft. This close to Haven, the signal was there, but patchy all the same. It still didn't conceal the caller ID. Raven offered a dark chuckle. Of course. It's him. It's Amber swallowed once for courage. Yeah, it's Ashbin. Crow swore softly and Naruto hissed out an angry breath. Don't answer it. Let the BSTRD stew. Amber dithered. Should she? He might have a good reason for calling. Fear stayed her hand. Could he give her the answers she sought? Would he tell the truth? The loyal follower in her wanted to say yes, but the cynic said otherwise. Ashbin might have a very good reason for keeping such secrets. But those secrets had nearly gotten her killed not once but twice now. Naruto had been kidnapped over them, a fact he had yet to forgive. He was right to want the truth, and in all honesty she wanted the same. Raven had said many things, but they needed to be certain. And there was only one way to ensure that certainty. One guaranteed method beyond bias, one that could not lie to them. Ashbin was a good person. There could be no doubt about that. But all these secrets were maddening. They could confront him later once they had the truth and the relic in hand. Once it had been used, they could hide it somewhere else or even seal it back in its vault. Surely he would understand at long last. Her scroll ceased ringing entirely as the call went to voicemail. Amber waited for a moment. Then another. Another still. It dinged and went still, signaling the message left behind. Well, Raven mocked. Aren't you going to listen to what he has to say? She kept it open again and put in on speaker. Hello, Amber. Ashbin's words rang through to be heard by them all. I'm worried for your safety. I've tried to call Crow and Naruto, but they haven't responded. I'm afraid something might have happened to them, that they might have been led astray. A weighty pause followed as he seemed to gather his thoughts. If you can hear this, then well. A deep breath followed. I'm sure Raven has told you a great many things about me. About Salem. Some of what she says is true. I've made mistakes. I'll be the first to admit that. More mistakes than any man, woman, or child alive. Please do not think less of me for them. The 5 of them exchanged a glance. All I ask is that you give me the chance to defend myself. More words. Raven growled. More lies. Don't trust the snake. This is what Salem wants. The headmaster's voice continued, heedless of her word, breaking at last. She seeks to divide us all, to conquer Remnant while we squabble with one another. Moreover, the maiden in Atlas has perished under mysterious circumstances. James suspects foul play at hand, and I'm inclined to agree with him. By some miracle, Winter is now in possession of her power, so we've managed to avert a crisis on that front. However, there's a chance you and Raven may be targeted as well. I think it's certain that the 2 you will come under attack. She likely has her agents in Mistral already. A commotion in the background muffled his words for a moment as he spoke to someone off-screen. You must listen to me. His voice grew louder, and she had the impression he was leaning closer to his scroll, begging, pleading with her. It is imperative that you return to Vale immediately with Raven. Please call me if you receive this message. We're stronger together, Amber. Don't let Salem tear everything apart. With a supreme effort of will, Amber silenced the scroll and closed it down. Was this all a part of Salem's grand plan? It was a sobering thought. She turned to find varying expressions waiting her. Not a bad speech. Raven drawled. He sounded sincere. She turned her head and spat. Then again, he's always been a good actor. Although I'm surprised. I don't think he knows we intend to use the lamp. He would have said something otherwise. So the Shnee's a maiden now. Crow wore a sour look of his own. Great. She's never gonna let me live this down. Little Vernal offered a helpless shrug. I really didn't understand any of that. Naruto, Amber ventured weakly. What do you think about all this? The Shinobi kept her a wary look. One Amber found herself mirroring. His blue eyes were sharp, not angry but not calm either. Whatever thoughts he felt, he kept close to his chest. He would have his answers and then confront Ashbin on them. But only after he had the relic. If it came to a fight between the two of them, she knew who would win. The outcome had never been in doubt. Well, that did it. She was locked in now. Best not to think about it. They were on the clock. I think we continue as we have been. His response only solidified her belief. We'll use the relic first, then question him. If he tells the truth, great. But if he lies, Amber fought down a pang of dread. What will you do? I'm not sure. Rather than answer properly, he offered her his hand instead. But whatever happens, we'll do it together, yeah. Amber felt her traitorous heart skip a beat as heat rose in her cheeks. Hers hands flew out to clasp his fingers in her own. Even after all this, he still refused to forsake her. What might have once fractured their friendship only left it stronger than ever before. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. She could die in this very moment and she would be at peace. In the end, she forced herself to pull away and speak before Naruto could question her. Race you to Haven, azure orbs narrowed to thin slits. You sure about that? Was she? No, not at all. Her mind was whirling, her beliefs crumbling, her very world falling apart around her. She didn't want to think about this. Any of it. Too much too soon. Ashbin had pleaded with her, and a part of her wanted nothing more than to go back to Vale, climb into bed, and pretend none of this had happened. A single seed of knowledge held her back. Naruto was going to Haven. With or without her. He'd already made his views abundantly clear. One way or another he would pry the relic from the vault and ask his questions. She could be there when he did her doubt herself forever. She was done doubting herself. What's wrong? Amber wore a shaky smile she didn't feel as she planted a hand on her hip. Afraid you can't keep up? No, he needled, more than happy to distract her. Just afraid of leaving you in the dust. Again. We'll make a wager of it then. Amber bit out the words. Naruto saw the chance for what it was and pounced upon it. Sure, why not? What are we betting? Food, money, time? The Fall Maiden held up a singed finger. Loser has to do whatever the winner says. For a day. She amended hastily when she beheld his incredulous expression. How's that sound? Naruto jammed both hands into his pockets. Not much of a bet since I know I'm gonna win. Amber marshaled her faltering willpower and clenched her fists at her sides. Then we'll sweeten the pot, she spat. An eyebrow arched. How so? A date? His other brow rose to join it. He muttered. Never been on one of those before. Thankfully, he was wise enough not to make mention of what Winter had all but blackmailed him into. Even then she still expected a denial. It was a foolish wish of hers, a girl's wish, one she thought would be denied. Alright, I'm game. The words floored her. Amber felt her eyes burn with a pulse of flame. Yes, victory. A petty little thrill of pride shot through her. Just like that she'd gone and won up that silly Schnee. Her rival was probably already displeased at being blown off, ironic, given she had Raven to thank for that, but this was the cherry atop the proverbial cake. Oh, this would leave Winter seething. Call it courtship, call it cruelty, but she'd made up her mind. She craved the calm and safety he gave her, craved it more than the very air in her lungs. She fully intended to have Naruto as her husband someday. Forget being partners, she could see herself spending the rest of her life with him after all. He understood her in a way few could. Even this good-natured jabbing felt friendly. You will be mine. Who will? Crow spoke into the silence. Amber's face flamed for a different reason. Oh gods, she'd said that aloud. No, not like this. Kids these days, just get a room, will ya? Raven rolled her eyes as well. Teenagers, the both of you. Stop flirting and FCK already. This is nauseating. A chorus of shouts went up. Ray. Seriously? Did you have to say that? Vernal made a series of gagging noises. Anyway. Amber's retreat turned into a full-blown rout as she backed away. We're leaving. Right now. Naruto dropped into a runner's crouch. Amber mirrored him. Ready, he hissed out. Set. She snarled, eager to be gone. Go. Naruto hooped loudly and burned gold. A thunderclap rattled the world and he was gone, leaving everyone's ears ringing. All that remained of him was a trail of burning saffron flames rode in his wake, scorching the road. As she looked on aghast, a fresh line of burning fire scorched its way up the path and into the distance. Amber felt her eyes widen. She took flight and shot after him with a yelp. No fair. There was something glorious about using her powers to fly. If anything, her semblance made it even easier. All told, she felt good. Weightless. Free. Better than she had any right to. The wind in her hair, gravity losing its stubborn hold of her, all the world a blur below. In moments Crow and the rest were long behind her. She knew Raven would catch up. Bloody Woman probably had a portal to Naruto now. She wouldn't put it past her, fate just seemed intent to screw her these days. But even with power she couldn't keep up. Naruto was fast. Almost ridiculously so. She saw him as little more than a golden speck on the horizon, already halfway to the city and Anne Haven within. Red eyes flashed up at her from below and she caught the grin on her face. She poured on a burst of speed, flames howling from her hands as she sought to close the distance between the two of them. He slowed just a pace. Just a hair. Then he sped away, and quite suddenly, it was like trying to chase a storm. They raced through fields, vaulted over fences, lunged across streets. In hindsight, Amber wasn't sure who started laughing first. It could have been her. It might have been him. Looking back, she really wasn't sure. It burst out of her in a joyous gasp, little tiny giggles fleeing from her as they chased one another. He always seemed so close, just out of reach, yet she wasn't able to overtake him. Rather than frustrated her, she found herself enjoying the chase, if only because it distracted her from everything else. It made her feel normal again. This was what life felt like. She never wanted to let it go. Eventually they arrived. She didn't even remember cresting the walls of Mistral, much less arriving at Haven itself, nor the ungodly commotion left in their wake. One moment they were without, the next they were quite suddenly within, and their chase came to a smashing end. Literally. And done. Naruto's back slammed against a wall. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, skin slck with sweat. Amber could only imagine how she must look, cheeks flushed, bosom heaving with heavy breaths. She was more winded than he was, and it likely showed. For all her pride and power, she wasn't much used to a full-on spring through the countryside, never mind the speed they'd been going. "You all right? Just a little tired?" she hummed, pushing herself upright. He stepped in to help, and without thinking, she leaned against him. His hands caught her, steadied her, gave her strength. Thoughtlessly she stepped into him, staggering them a little. The wayward ninja pivoted to hold her up and catch her again, his hands settled against her hips with gentle strength. It felt like they belonged there. "Who won?" Naruto asked suddenly. Amber blinked away the haze with an effort. She didn't know, and she said as much. Neither of them had paid any attention to their arrival. They'd been having too much fun to notice, and if she was with herself, care. Her instincts stirred again. This felt good. It felt safe. It felt right. She wanted to stay in his arms forever. "I don't know," she admitted. Amber looked up and her throat went dry. "What's wrong?" He blinked. "Why were you looking at me like that?" Why was she hesitating? Uncle Crow had made a painful point earlier. Even Raven, absolute beach though she was, had spoken the truth. She'd never kissed a boy before. She'd never done that with, well, anyone. Her power had always kept everyone away. Or perhaps it was Ashbin keeping her safe. Who could say she didn't begrudge the headmaster for it? Here her mind was already elsewhere. She wanted to embrace Naruto. Her already dry throat turned absolutely arid at the thought. Amber elked her lips and swallowed, then coughed, desperately trying to bring some much-needed moisture to her mouth. Focus. Now wasn't the time for this at all. They had a mission to complete. She couldn't let herself grow distracted, lest Sheshwat was she worried about again. "Dimin, you're thirsty." A tiny naughty voice cooed in the back of her head. "Just take him already." Amber turned nearly incandescent. "No," she wailed. "It's not like that. Isn't it?" The voice came on again. "You're lusting after him like a beach in heat. Make your move or move on. You owe it to yourself to be honest with him." Didn't she? If the alternative meant letting Winter, or gods forbid, Raven have him, that tore it. In the back of her head, the very last thread of restraint snapped with an audible twang. Naruto looked like he wanted to say something, perhaps question her at the very least, and that made it even worse. She was so very tired of talking, of dancing around this like some love-struck girl. "Naruto." He blinked. She stepped forward. "Don't move." Amber pushed herself up on the very tips of her toes and kissed him. Naruto wasn't sure what to expect when Amber's eyes began to burn. Oh, he knew she was emotional at the moment, and he couldn't much blame her for it. Even so, he still didn't expect the embrace. Even if he'd been forewarned about it, he still wouldn't have moved in time. She trembled in his arms, pushed herself up on the very tips of her toes, and pressed her lips to his. Naruto sucked in a sharp breath. Stars, entire galaxies, burst through his mind. His breath hitched, and he was sure he heard Kurama say something to him, but everything suddenly seemed muted somehow. Faded. Distant. His very being tensed, but she made no effort to follow up her actions. She simply stood there, heat tilted just so, a quiet, forlorn girl pressing herself into his arms. Winter had been cold and angry. Raven, fire and passion. By contrast, Amber was gentle, hesitant, almost afraid. Her mouth was warm and soft against his, tasting faintly of vanilla and cherries. Her body welded against his like she belonged there. Her hips fit against his as she twined one leg with his, not to prevent him from getting away, but merely so she could pull herself closer to him. He wanted more. Something awoke inside Naruto all over again, but with a supreme effort of will he held himself back and pulled away. Amber made a tiny noise of disappointment when he did so. It almost sounded like a manga. Bad brain. Full stop. Proper thoughts. Why did you stop? Her words were a whine, one that nearly broke him. Didn't want to take advantage of you, he drawled. And there it was, the honest, unvarnished truth. Advan you dolt. Her eyes pulsed with living flame as she slapped his chest. I was the one to embrace you. Please, try. What was the saying? Third time's the charm. It was exactly what he needed. She came alive in his arms, surging up to fling her own around his neck and link them together even as she angled her head to allow him better access. Belatedly he realized he was having difficulty holding her. Her body shifted against his, trying to squirm closer, but something kept pulling it away. He soon saw why. Amber. She blinked. He pointed. You're floating. She looked down and her dark face turned darker still. She was hovering a good inch or so off the ground. Enough to be aware of, but scarcely be seen. He wouldn't have noticed it at all if he weren't holding her. Was this her semblance, or merely her powers playing up? He stumbled back as she slammed her head into his shoulder, grabbed him by the face, then drew him back to her. Her mouth closed on his again, and this time there was passion. Fire burned through Naruto's veins as she tilted her head against him, angling for a better embrace. She was as nervous as he, but made up for it with sheer tenacity. Every embrace hastened the beat of his heart, every touch was like searing ice in his veins. Her fingers dug into his back as she hooked one leg around his waist, his fingers sweeping down to support her rear and her weight with it. Excuse me, someone called out to them. Might I have a moment of your time? No. Naruto ignored them with a growl as he pulled her close. Not now. Amber flung a lazy arm in that direction. Go away. I'm afraid I must insist. With a long-suffering sigh, the pair parted. While Naruto tried to part, Amber latched onto his hand as she drifted back down to the ground, and he didn't have the heart to make her let go. Her fingers threaded perfectly in his, and he fought down a sudden rush of warmth. That warmth faded somewhat when he saw their wooed boudoir lingering only a few paces away. Leonardo Lionheart stood before them, fretfully winging his hands together. You must be Naruto. Might I ask what you're doing here? Really, this is most irregular. A brief explanation later found the three of them in the headmaster's office. All told, it rather reminded Naruto of the room Tsunade once used for her own duties as Hokage, albeit lined with bookshelves and other knickknacks. Gently sloped windows filtered morning sunlight in the room, lending it an orangish glow. Really, it was a homely little place, homely little area. There was something off about the whole thing. Naruto had never met Lionheart before, never even knew the man, and yet he couldn't quite bring himself to relax in his presence. For all his gregarious laughter and jovial smiles, the man radiated fear on almost primal level. He'd offered them tea. Naruto refused to drink it, and perhaps sensing his distrust, she hadn't either. Where are all the hunters? Amber remarked suddenly. I haven't seen one since we got here. Only a few students. Well, they're quite busy, as I'm sure you can imagine. Nervous laughter greeted them. Grim to kill, civilians to protect, that sort of thing. Many of the students themselves are away on holiday and only a few remain in the dorms. He tapped the tan knuckles against his desk. Rest assured, it's usually quite busy here. Kurama hissed out a breath. He's lying. I know. Even after all this time, he could still sense negative emotions. If anything, his time in Remnant had only served to sharpen this strange sixth sense of his. Leonardo Lionheart was a man who projected confidence, but felt none of it. His smile was as brittle as glass. This was a fearful man, terrified really, but not of them. Who, then what was he so afraid of? He had a bad feeling about this just like that. His guard went and a dozen walls slammed into place within his mind. Were they being set up? Was he being paranoid? Not, it didn't feel like it. And yet this strange feeling of dread hounded him without end. An idea dawned. While he had no way to warn Amber without revealing himself, there was a way to confirm his suspicions, assuming it didn't blow up in his face. And he was so very tired of dancing around this. We need the lamp. Leo's fear spiked tenfold, followed by a cold thread of anger directed solely at him. Naruto fought down a bitter smile. Well, that confirmed it. Whoever this man was, he clearly couldn't be trusted. Was he a traitor? Could be. Might not. His heart didn't want to believe it, but his senses hadn't let him down yet. He suspected Leo would refuse them before the words even left his mouth. If the man allowed them use of the lamp without issue, then there wouldn't be any problem. But if he refused, that's out of the question. Oh, he tried to sound stern, but the fear he felt all but cut the legs out from under it. I cannot simply give you the relic, we weren't asking. He slammed both hands on the desk and leaned forward. Ashbin knows all about this. Now it was his turn to lie, and he weaved a tall tale all its own. The Spring Maiden's already on her way here to open the vault. We'll use it, ask our questions, and then we'll be on our way. Lionheart's face twisted. Spring has been found. Was she missing in the first place? Never mind. You went with it? Yup. She's on her way with Crow. We were sent ahead to tell you. 2C. The headmaster all but gulped, tugging at his collar. Has he done it? Then does Ashbin have a way to defeat Salem once and for all? But Salem couldn't be destroyed now, could she? Raven had said as much. A dozen alarm bells went off in the back of Naruto's head. He pushed through them all. The more he learned, the less of this he liked. Lionheart had gone from untrustworthy to dangerous in his mind. Fearful men did foolish things, he does. Amber leaned over beside him and made the lie all the more convincing. We're talking to you now as a courtesy, nothing more. Lionheart sagged in his chair, shoulders slumping. A strange resignation came over him. It left Naruto even more wary than before. Yes, he muttered to himself. Yes, I suppose it makes sense that he would send the two of you ahead to secure the relic. Straightening, he rose from his chair and stood to his full towering height. Naruto couldn't help but notice that the man had his weapon there on his desk. Leonardo donned it now, securing the strange device to his wrist. They'll take you to the statue. Amber preened, blissfully unaware of it. You'd best. Where had he gone wrong on a certain level? Ashbin knew as he regarded his still silent scroll. He'd kept too many secrets, held his cards too close to his chest. Something was bound to backfire sooner or later. It often did and had in many a past life. But he kept some matters silent for a reason. Knowledge is a terrible thing, and more often than not it broke the minds of men. He laid his scroll down on his desk and stood, paced to the window. Alone in his tower, the lonely immortal watched the coming storm behind the glass. Thick black clouds roiled. They were going to use the lamp. He couldn't say how or why, he knew only that he did. It was the only path they could take now. He could have called Leonardo to delay them, could have flown to Mistral himself. Tried to stop them at the very least. But didn't and hadn't. Instead he'd held himself back, merely reaching out through repeated phone calls. Any attempt at subterfuge on his part would be taken poorly, if not by Naruto then Amber certainly. Those two had endured much. Too much, some might say. If he were to lie them now, if he attempted to spin a web of half-truths before them, they would break away and all would be lost. It was a risky gambit. If the Spring Maiden was secure and the questions used, then Salem would be forestalled another 100 years. But if they weren't, Ashbin shook his head, sighed, pulled a thermos from his belt and drank. Whiskey burned the back of his throat. He suspected he'd need more before this day was done. Salem was moving. The death of the Winter Maiden was merely a portent of the times. That left Naruto connect to not one, not two, but 3 maidens. Who could say how Winter might react to such an awful truth? Naruto had ingratiated himself in the minds of many, and to remove him now would spell disaster. He bore the boy no ill will, of course. He would learn the truth and then he would come here. He would have questions, and Ashbin had long ago resolved himself to answer them all. For that boy was the key. Regardless of the outcome, there would be a reckoning. Would they be allies after this, enemies? He wasn't sure. He did not relish the idea of losing Crow, much less a maiden, but he relished the idea of dying even less. Naruto had proven his skill in combat and he wasn't sure he could face him in a fair fight. Even an unfair one almost guaranteed his defeat. That boy held incredible power. If used for the wrong purpose, time would tell. A peal of thunder boomed outside. Ashbin raised his mug to lips and took a long drink. So it begins? Something was wrong. Naruto couldn't put his finger on it, but he'd been feeling restless for the last 5 minutes as Lionheart led them through the halls. His senses were sharp as ever, and he was almost certain of their safety, but even then he couldn't quite bring himself to relax. He grit his teeth and tried to shake the strange feeling of dread away, to no avail. The boy in him wanted to trust, wanted to believe. They were safe here in Haven. No one was going to turn on them. There would be no ambush here, no betrayals, no surprises. The cynic said otherwise. Something sealed in the back of his brain. Wait. Surprises when they'd met? Lionheart had known his name. Before he'd even given it. He'd ignored it at the time, thought it a slip of the tongue, or that Ashbin had mentioned him. He hadn't. Blue eyes narrowed in realization. Not a moment later, his senses told him what he already knew. Damn it. He hated being right. The foyer was a wide and grand thing indeed, not an enclosed space this, but a wide open area with multiple levels, decked in the colors of brown and green. Looked downright earthy really. It was the statue in the center of the room that caught Naruto's eye, however. That thing had to have a purpose. Was the vault there beneath it? Somehow his mind whirled, trying to find an answer. It stopped when he saw the two figures flanking said statue. Why am I not surprised? One was an absolute brute of a man clad in a green coat. From him, Naruto felt nothing but stoic anger. His companion was another matter. Though he wore a brown jacket, one could glimpse strange white clothes lurking beneath. As they approached, he flung it aside and began bounding on the S of his feet. Manic glee pervaded the air, enough to leave his senses physically ill. Wait, I know that man. Amber hissed out a breath and slowed. Naruto mirrored the motion. To his credit, Lionheart tried to spin the situation. Never fear, these are associates of mine. The man began, they're here to guard the relic, nothing more, stop lying. She rounded on him. That's Tyrion Kalos. He's a murderer. The man flinched as the words slapped him in the face. Oh joy of joys. The one in white clapped like a giddy child. And who might you be? Naruto right back at you. With a long-suffering sigh, the ninja tensed his shoulders. Whoever you are, whatever you want, we're not here to fight. Why friend, my name is Tyrion. Much to his dismay, the madman giggled and sketched a shallow bow, stinger sweeping behind his back. And I'm afraid that is not possible. You see, my assignment from Her Grace was to seek out a young man matching your description and retrieve them, so that is what I must do. His grin grew as he straightened. One does not upset the queen. Queen, Amber hissed at his side. Great. Someone else wants to meet me. Naruto growled back, can't you all just bugger off? I'm afraid not. The giant in green spoke at last. Surrender the maiden. Amber bristled behind him, keeping one eye on Lionheart. Oddly enough, the man didn't make a move. To the untrained eye, he seemed almost defeated. I think we've had enough talk now, don't you? Behind them, the air rippled. Naruto all but grinned. Sure. Why not? A crimson blade parted the air where the madman stood as Raven came hurtling through with Crow at her back. The giant saw her coming and threw himself clear. He caught a lightning bolt to the chest for it and hurtled across the room. Crow gave chase with a roar. His companion made no such effort as the spring maiden closed with him. Her blade would have taken his head, if the madman's body hadn't contorted at an impossible angle and ducked at the last moment. Twin blades fell cut out, locking against her sword. As I live and breathe, Raven Branwen. He cackled, bounding back to his feet. A true huntress has entered the fray. I didn't realize this was your territory. He's mine. Hands off. Oi. Naruto squawked. I don't belong to anyone. No. Something cleared behind them. You don't. Goodbye. Amber yelped. And the world exploded. Naruto was ready for it. The moment he felt Lionheart's ill intent, he yanked his partner into him and wrapped them both in a shimmering shroud of golden chakra. Heat and flames washed harmlessly over his shoulders, leaving him untouched. Smoke filled the air. A blood-red iris peeked over his shoulder. That was a mistake. What are you? Leonardo lowered his arm, eyes wide. The headmaster traitor. Paled and shrank back. No wait. I can explain. Naruto's fist thundered into his jaw, bringing with it the wrath of Mistral's fallen huntsman. The cowardly lion never stood a chance. He didn't stumble across the room. He flew. His body struck a wall, left a decidedly man-shaped impression behind, and crashed face-first into the floor, lolled limply to the side. He did not rise again. No, he growled, lowering his arm. You can't. Oh. Tyrion offered a mad giggle as he clapped his hands. How delightful. I call dibs on the boy. Hazel blocked his advance with a large forearm. No. You take the maidens. The boy is mine. Party pooper. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto sighed. Crow. Raven. He raised his voice, briefly bringing the combat to a lull. Get the relic. We'll handle them. He crossed his fingers and reveled in the brief look of confusion everyone wore. He'd never get tired of that. The urge to simply flood the room with shadow clones and swarm their enemies was almost overpowering. But that wouldn't be enough. That wouldn't satisfy him. Instead he flung 3 at Hazel and 3 more at Tyrion. The copies died almost instantly, but their purpose was served. They weren't meant to fight. They were simple distractions, nothing more. Everyone separated and the world turned to a blur. He didn't look to see if his shout was followed. Instead, He lunged at Hazel. Amber shot toward the ceiling, eyes blazing. Tyrion climbed up after her, leaving them to one another. You want to play mad? Fine. Amber growled, eyes burning molten gold as she dove down after him. Let's be mad. A fist crashed into Tyrion's face and sent him skipping down the hall. He was still flying through the air when another found him and sent him flying in the other direction. Wheel. A giggle greeted him as he clambered upright. You certainly flew quite a bit there. Let's do that again. I've got a lot of anger to burn off, and you're going to be my punching bag buster. Baleful red eyes bled back into blue as Naruto released his cloak. Why do this? We're not enemies. You serve Ashpin. The giant reared back and jammed a dust crystal into his arm. That's enough. I don't work for him, you big oaf. Hazel's muscles began to writhe and twist beneath his jacket, growing to grotesque proportions. The giant stabbed his hands into his belt and a second crystal joined the first, followed by a third, fourth, fifth. With each injection his body warped and twisted, taking on an almost crimson hue. Naruto looked up. Up again as the man continued to grow. Kurama swore as Hazel's shadow engulfed them. That might be a problem. And still he continued to contort, his body writhing as arcs of fire and lightning crawled across his bristling shoulders. We were told of your strength. Even Hazel's voice had deepened now, a great bass undertone that rattled the very floor. You will not find me wanting. He moved with a speed that belied his new size and slammed a punch at his face. Naruto evaded with ease, sweeping to the side before those crackling fingers could make their mark. Was that it? BSRD might be big, but he wasn't going to hit him like he did not dodge the current that chased after Hazel's fist. Arg. Electricity slammed into him and every muscle clamped down, forcing him to one knee. His world burned white as BLD vessels burst in his eyes, staining the scara scarlet. Hazel pounced and decked him in his moment of weakness, nearly laying him out on the floor. Anyone else would have been finished surely. A lone tooth whistled into the air as Kurama blunted the pain and forced him to focus. All right. Naruto wheezed smoke. Should have seen that one coming. My turn now. Hazel struck again and this time he struck back, ignoring the pain. His first punch slammed the growling giant into the ground. A second pinned him there. Just stop moving already. Hazel jammed a sixth crystal into his thigh and flung him off. Your efforts are in vain. He informed him briskly, growing once more. I cannot feel pain. Rhymes aside, the realization alarmed Naruto. Something cold and strong coalesced deep inside him. He'd held back. Against Cinder and her minions. What had that earned him? Nothing but misery and pain. Restraining the lion's share of his strength here was going to get him killed. No more. Not one more. Mercy meant nothing to these men. They were monsters. Somewhere behind him, Amber cried out in pain. He dare not look away to check on her. Instead he crossed his fingers. Shadow clone Hazel thundered forward, forcing him to abandon the jutsu and block. Pain thundered down his arms as he caught the blow. I don't need you to feel pain. He warned. I just need you to go down. This time he didn't hold back. Hazel came in again and he met him halfway with a roar. As ever he led with a right hook. It proved to be his downfall. Naruto caught his arm, gritting his teeth as sparks coursed through him again. He was prepared for it and the pain that followed. Knee trick. He grinned against the current arcing through his teeth. Let me show you one of mine. Gritting his aching teeth, he dragged Hazel's arm down and slammed an elbow into muscle. Aura crackled. Flesh and bone gave with an ominous crack. Naruto struck again, and the arm striving against him went limp as he found his proper target. Hazel grunted in surprise, but he didn't scream. Wide eyes regarded the spike of white bone jutting out of his wrist. With an ugly crack he pushed it back in. Last chance. Naruto warned as he settled back into a stance. Stay down or I swear by all that is holy I will put you down. Hazel straightened slowly. You would murder a man in cold blood. Naruto fought down a flinch. His conscience protested, a man no. I wouldn't kill a man. Until he murdered it. Ah, but you. Blue eyes gleamed gold, then red as he ceded control to Kurama. You're not a man. You're a pig. Let me hear you squeal. He blurred into the giant's guard, one arm swept back to strike. Hazel squinted as he heard a faint keening noise. It was the last sound he'd ever hear. Tell me the truth. If you could have one wish, her teacher was a god. That was the only title little Vernal could think to give Naruto as she watched him beat Hazel to death. Not halfway dead. Not within an inch of. Teacher was going to kill him. There could be no doubt about that. Not with the way he was fighting. Every strike was made with the intent to cripple. Every blow broke bones faster than they could be set. Each strike sent BLD splashing across the walls, painting them in grisly red relief. Really, it was a miracle Hazel was still alive at all after taking that last attack. Even with aura, the human body could only take so much damage. And numb or not, Hazel was taking damage. His left eye was ruined, leaving a weeping wound behind. His chest had become a scarred and bloodied mess, with only the vaguest threads of clothing clinging to his scarred shoulders. Dust seemed to be the only thing that held him together now, and even that too was beginning to fail him. His arm were a charred mess, blackened and twisted by electricity and flames. The other was gone entirely, severed well above the elbow, cauterized by the hell that was the raisin shuriken. Yet still he stood for all the good it did him. Hazel, Hazel, Hazel. The words that followed cut deeper than any jutsu. Why must you be such a disappointment? A clawed hand struck him in the stomach, folding the ruined mane in half. Whatever would your sister say if she saw you like this? Hazel screamed. Struck a nerve, have I good? A clawed hand closed around his hair, bringing his face to his. I hope it burns. I hope she knows you're a monster. You're acting like one. Despite herself, Vernal winced. This wasn't a battle anymore. It had ceased to be one 5 minutes ago when his eyes went red. She wasn't sure if that was a power-up or something, but he certainly treated it as such. Hazel hadn't been able to land a hit since then, and the ranting diatribe that followed hadn't helped him any. If anything, it only made Naruto angrier. And the angrier he got, the harder he hit. Salem can't be stopped, he says. An awful crack as he broke the giant's right arm. She's a force of nature, he says. A devastating crunch as Hazel lost 3 of his fingers. Well, people are a force of nature too. Just look at Amber. Tyrion yelped as a fire blasted him from his feet and flung him across the foyer. We're still here. We're still fighting. Even I'm here because I want to be. A spinning kick sent teeth sailing into the air. But you? Your sister died to the Grim, and you decided to work for the literal queen of evil. Where's the sense in that? If you've got a sodding problem with Ashpin, take it up with him. Not us. The boss is pretty scary when he's mad, how Vernal murmured. Nah. A familiar voice drawled beside her. That ain't him. You can tell by the way he's talking. Vernal turned to regard the clone left to watch her. What are you on about? Naruto is Naruto. He's right there. He is, and that's not him. The doppelganger waved a hand. That's Kurama. But you're right, he's probably pretty pissed off if he let the fur out to play. Haven't seen him this angry since Deidara. Vernal blinked. Who? Crazy BSTRD who ate clay and made bombs. The clone shrugged. He's dead, by the way. Your world's weird. Don't I know it? Hazel sailed past them and crashed through a staircase. Naruto Kurama sauntered after him with a lazy gait, uncaring as the giant struggled upright. He was still struggling when the blonde reached him, grabbed him by the hair again and wrenched him upright again. There was no mercy to be found behind those crimson eyes. Cruel, clawed fingers. What's wrong? The blonde's distorted voice rang out as he slammed Hazel's battered body into a wall. You were talking a real good game a few minutes ago. What happened to all that bravado? Ichiringe, not gonna talk, that's fine. I'm feeling chatty today. See, that's the thing about my partner. He laughed, shaking the BLD from his hand. He's merciful. He's fond of second chances. He gave me one. I took it. But you, a CLCK of the tongue, a shake of the head. You had one's chance. One opportunity to see sense. You wasted it. And unlike him, I don't spare my enemies. Hazel howled at him and smashed him into the floor. Kurama cackled and backhanded him, sending the giant sprawling. Vernal continued to watch. Raven and Crow had already gone below to retrieve the relic. She could have gone with them. Could have sought shelter in the vault below while the adults fought up above. Instead she chose to stay. To linger rather to watch. Why wouldn't she if she was going to be trained by this man? Then she wanted to see how he fought. She knew she couldn't fight here. She hated it, but she accepted the truth. She wasn't big enough. Wasn't strong enough. Not yet. But one day she could be. And for now she could watch. And in watching she learned. Amber fought like a madwoman against Tyrion, slinging spells and elements around with frightful dispatch. Nothing to learn there. Only fear. But Naruto, there was something she could appreciate. Hazel's fist slammed into his face again. That very fist had shattered men before him. The ground splintered underfoot and a portion of the wall behind him gave way. Put a little more force into it, would ya? The whiskered warrior yawned. It's not often I get to enjoy a jaunt like this. The giant grabbed him by the face and rammed his forehead against his. Once, twice, thrice. Aura cracked and sputtered. He was left with a bloody nose. Slitted eyes rose to regard him with mild disappointment, utterly unharmed, utterly unimpressed. Vernal felt a chill shoot down her spine, and she wasn't even the recipient of that smoldering glare. This wasn't Naruto. This was an immortal demon who saw humans as a distraction at best, playthings at worst. And it looked bored. Immortals were scary when they were bored. What did I just say? Hazel's arms sailed through the air. It was surprisingly cathartic to watch the monster take his lumps. That brute would have broken Raven in half if he ever got his hands on her, and yet someone little more than half his size was beating him like a drum. Bloody Big BSTRD had been 8 feet tall to begin with, even bigger now with all that dust running through him. He must have gained at least another foot or two. That put him at what, 10 feet? To Naruto's 6 it should have been an insurmountable difference. Someone amped up on that many dust crystals should have been unstoppable. Should have. Keyword there. Enough. You're boring me. Die and be with your sister. Maybe she'll be more merciful than me. Vernal settled in to watch the slaughter that followed. And by the brother gods it was glorious. Kurama rammed a second raisin shuriken into Hazel's chest. Hazel ceased to exist. Vernal burst to her feet and slammed a fist into the air. That's my teacher. She wanted to be just like him when she grew up. Amber couldn't hit him. Try as she might, she just couldn't land a solid shot in on Tyrion Kalos anymore. Nor could he harm her. He knew it, she knew it, and neither of them were able to do anything about it. Just thinking of it infuriated her as she called another molten spear to her hand and cast it at him. They were at an impasse. The best they'd managed was a few glancing blows and the occasional explosion on her part, but never enough to truly settle the score. For while Amber could not harm him, he was unable to reach her in turn. Do come down, dear maiden. There's no need to be Essex. Amber scoffed. And get stung by you? I think not. She'd learned her lesson against Cinder while not unskilled in melee, she wasn't a emissary in it. Her true talents lay in other realms. Thus, she chose to stay airborne and rain down elemental destruction like a destructive goddess. Fire, ice, lightning, anything she could get her hands on. Maiden power, while not necessarily tied to aura, was mighty all the same. She could keep him at bay like this until Raven and Crow returned, or Naruto dispatched Hazel. She intended to, much to Tyrion's annoyance. Whenever the scorpion came close as he had to, she pelted him with fire and lightning. When that didn't work, she could simply fly up to the ceiling, thereby forcing him to scale one of the pillars if he wanted to have any chance of catch her. Even now she could see the frustration writ upon his face as she floated away. The madman had long since given up trying to shoot her out of the sky, realizing it a futile gesture or having simply run out of ammunition. Amber suspected it was the latter. She'd heard his gun CLCK empty and he hadn't reloaded since. Still, she seethed with each passing second as the storm raged around them. Flames surged from her eyes as she flung her right hand forward, conjuring a fresh bolt of heavenly light. Tyrion avoided it all. My, aren't we angry today? Writhing, bending, twisting, ducking, dodging at impossible angles, he somehow managed to keep ahead of her. Amber resisted the temptation to chase him. That was what he wanted. Get in close, use his semblance to cut through her aura and do her in. He'd already traced a bloody line against her hip. She'd not make that mistake again. Her staff twirled, a mighty gust of wind burning from the crystal within a blast shook the world. Amber jolted, her concentration lost. She turned her head just in time to see Hazel's ruined corpse crash down the main stairwell, through the arms of a statue and into the floor. Even from here she could see his wounds. A flash of pity burned bright in her chest and she stubbornly quashed it. He was missing a good portion of his chest alongside an arm and a leg. Numb or not, there would be no getting up from that. He was dead. He had to be. Even a monster like him couldn't possibly, behind you. Naruto's shout came too late. A shadow fell over her as Tyrion descended, formed the rafters above with a mad cackle. He landed on her back, locked his legs around her upper torso, pinning her arms, and started hacking, ripping her from the sky and all but riding her down to the ground as he tore into her. Amber snapped her head backward, driving her head into his chin. It availed her not. Curved blades swung madly and bit through her aura to find the vulnerable flesh of her back and shoulders. BLD sprayed through the air. Her strength waned. Out of the corner of his eye, she saw his something FLCK forward in a dark streak of brown. No. Golden eyes burned white hot. Not like this. In that brief moment of surprise, his tail stabbed down at her chest. Amber wrenched herself out to one side and kicked out at him, but it was too late. A burning heat seared up her leg as his stinger raked across her thigh and moved through the muscle there. His tail flexed, pumping poison through her veins. An explosion of flame ripped him from her back, but the damage was done. Tyrion crashed backward and an earth-shattering roar rocked the room. Amber. She barely heard him as crashed to the floor, tumbling to her hands and knees. There was BLD on her hands. Oh, is it mine? It took her mind a reeling moment to comprehend what had happened. Tyrion's blades had cut deep into muscle and bone. His poison deeper still. Even now she could feel it burning in her veins in a sickly torrent of agony. The flames in her eyes guttered out as her knees buckled. Frantic, she pushed herself up on her elbows and tried to stave off her weakness. Shadows closed in, tugging into the corners of her vision. Her world began to spin as Tyrion's boots filled her sight. "Sleep well, dear princess." Amber turned narrow eyes on him with a hiss. "You first." Her hand locked around his ankle, tan fingers biting deep. Lightning coursed through her hand and shot up his leg into his chest. For the first time since their brawl began, Tyrion shrieked in pain. Every muscle in his body clamped down as his body jerked like a puppet severed from its master's strings. Limbs twitched, sparks scrawled through his teeth, his very hair stood on end, body trashing madly. Somehow, someway, the absolute madman managed to raise one of his blades. "You little beach." A golden meteor crashed into him before he could deal the final blow and beat him back. "Get your hands." 5 hits. Ember saw them all. One for every word. Face, throat, chest, groin, solar plexus. Tyrion staggered back under the assault, flailing like a madman as he tried to block them all. He did not succeed. Every punch hammered through his defenses, each kick cracked bone and tore muscle alike. He was driven back, furthest still, unable to keep pace. Finally he slipped up. An almighty uppercut caught his chin, launched him toward one of the upper levels. The streak of holy light raced back to her. A marked hand touched Amber's back and everything burned again. "You're all right, little bird?" An oddly familiar voice crooned. "Just breathe. I've got you." Pleasant heat rushed through her shoulders, pushing the poison away and taking the cloying darkness with it. She gasped, back arching, wounds closing as if they'd never existed at all. Was the work of but a moment. A single touch brought her from the brink of death back to the land of the living. Her heart howled in her ears, hammering a harsh pace that nothing could hope to match. Hacking and coughing, retching and gasping, Amber curled into A and whispered a silent prayer of thanks to the brother gods. Twice. That was twice she'd been saved from certain death now. She wasn't certain there would be a third. "Stay here." She distantly heard him. "I'll handle this." She sucked in a ragged gasp as her eyes began to burn again, stronger than ever before. Her aura might have been spent, but the maiden power was tied to her emotions. It surged through her veins, eager to lash out at the one who had hurt her. It took everything she had to hold in check. Finally she dared look up. "Naruto." "No, no, no." A clawed finger wagged. "Naruto's not here right now. He's taking a nap. I'm here to lay down the law. Just sit tight." Realization dawned. "Kurama, He fed her a thumbs up. "Got it in one." Amber coughed up a wad of BLD. "Ah, so this is what you sound like. How lovely." Tyrion tumbled to his feet from one of the upper floors, grinning like his namesake. "You're actually trying to kill me." He skipped from one foot to the other as he landed. "I knew you had it in you. My queen will be so pleased." His fed forward. A sizzling drop of poison fell down to sear through the floor below. And it would seem that dear Cinder was right. Wide eyes alighted upon Amber. Just looking at him left her feeling ill. "You can heal others." "I put enough poison in her to drop a Beringel. She should be dead by now." Another giggle. "Yet she lives. How wonderful." The killer took a low, sweeping stance. "What say we kick things up a notch or two?" Kurama stopped smiling. Instead he turned to face Tyrion, body carrying shades of golden and red. "Do you know the definition of insanity, Tyrion?" He all but sang the words. "Oh, who am I kidding? You're already insane." "Of course you do. But just in case you've forgotten," his fist shot up, catching the hooked blades before they could separate his head from his shoulders. Another blade smacked home into his hand, forcing the two of them into a deadlock. Tyrion tittered and pushed back. No doubt the Faunus fancied his chances in a contest of strength. That was a mistake. Insanity is doing the exact. A golden heel shot out, bloodying the man's nose. Same thing, another blow, another yelp. Over and over again, expecting things to change. Kurama leaned forward, pushing the Faunus back through raw strength alone. "That's crazy." Tyrion broke the block and whirled to strike at his knees, only to find empty air. "You're the same, Tyrion." A boot planted itself on the man's back, kicking him forward. "You keep attacking me like this, keep doing the exact same stupid thing." He ducked the riposte that followed, swept his legs and rammed a kunai into the older man's right arm, drawing a startled gurgle from him. Over and over and over and over again thinking, this time is gonna be different. "No, no, no, please." AFLCK of his wrist tore it out and hacked at him a second time, tearing a second trench across his chest. "This time is gonna be different." "Well, A laugh burst from him, deep and feral. I hate to burst your bubble, but this Tyrion's tail stabbed at his face. Naruto caught in his right hand, wrenched his arm down and to the left, overextending the stinger. His knife came out and cut through the chitinous appendage like paper. This is where you die. Purple poison and dark arterial blood spattered the floor. Tyrion lashed out in a blind rage. Kurama shattered his weapons, kicked him down, then trapped him there for good measure. A booted foot planted itself against the faunus's wiry neck. His right hand swept back, fingers clenching into a vicious claw. As Amber looked on, a vermilion Rasengan snarled in his open palm. Tyrion snarled and thrashed like a man possessed, but even his anger availed him not. Abruptly he gave up and slumped. Go on. A strange, surreal smile blossomed across his twisted face. Do it. Kill me. Become the monster I knew you are. My goddess will welcome you with open arms. Oh, and then. A giddy giggle fled from his lips. You'll burn the world. Ah, it's just as she has foreseen. Kurama kicked him again, drawing another gasp. Goddess, you say, he chortled angrily. Puny mortal. We've beaten a goddess before. What makes you think yours will be any different? His arm crashed down. Amber latched onto his wrist. Red eyes blazed into molten gold. You cannot be serious. He nearly killed you. We need him alive. She insisted, tugging at his arm. He'll have information. Do we? Kurama sighed, displeasure twisting Naruto's face into a scowl. Do we really? Yes. He might know her plans. Hazel was one thing, but she wasn't about to stand by here, not when they had a chance to finally learn something of the woman hunting them. More than that, something told her they would regret crossing this line, regret it more than anything else. Tyrion was goading him on. Killing was a slippery slope. Once you started, it was difficult to stop. She knew that firsthand. She'd killed before, crossed that line, and had to drag herself back over it. She wouldn't let them make the same mistakes, not when she could save them from that hell. He wants you to kill him. She hissed, eyeing Tyrion's smug face. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Man's a lunatic. Kurama feigned an indifferent shrug. They don't make sense. I'm not debating this with you. Put Naruto back on already. He blew out a sigh. All right, can't blame an old fox for having a bit of fun. Amber saw the precise moment her partner re-emerged. It wasn't in his eyes, though they did shift from red to blue. No, it was the posture that truly reflected the chance. His stance became less aggressive, his smile just a little less feral. He may have kept his boot on Tyrion's throat, but he didn't look like he'd crush it any moment now. Fine. He lives. Such a shame. Tyrion crowed. And here I was hoping you'd take the plunge. Quiet. Naruto's kicked down, striking his skull. The madman crumpled with a gurgle. I'll leave some clones to watch Lionheart and get rid of Boss. Vernal yelped. Naruto whipped around to see his would-be apprentice leaping back. Amber joined him, just in time to see something hurtle out of the room, clutching what remained of the giant's corpse. Whatever it was, it didn't look human. She glimpsed a shock of black framed by white bone and dark fur. It looked like a hound of some sort. Grim. Here. In the academy. That wasn't possible. It shouldn't be possible. Blast it. The blonde snapped his fingers together, summoning a trio of clones. After him. Paralyzed by the horror of what she'd just seen, Amber didn't stop him. A lingering blood trail told a grisly tale. What would a Grim want with a dead body they didn't need to eat? How had one even made it this far into the school at all? Naruto summoned another horde of clones, numbering 5 in all. Watch those 2. He commanded, jerking a finger toward Lionheart and another at Tyrion. If anyone comes and tries to take them away, explain what happened. They keep trying, stop them. Each snapped off a salute, but something in his words worried Amber all the same. Tyrion's a wanted murderer. Most of Mistral knows him. But Lionheart, well, there are cameras all over the school. When Naruto didn't answer, she reached out and grabbed his hand. He won't get away with this. Ashbin won't let him. Her fingers threaded with his. It's all right. You can breathe now. We won. As she looked on, his expression softened. Fair enough, Vernal. The younger girl jolted under his gaze. Yeah, teach, you're with us. We're going down into the vault. Crow and Raven should have the relic by now. Steeling herself, Amber turned and followed him down into the vault. Jin stirred in her prison. Ah, freedom at last. How long it had been. She knew her summoner the moment he touched the relic. It wasn't a conscious decision on her part. She did not choose to know the young man currently hold the lamp. She simply did. Such was a gift granted her by the gods. Hers as a boon of knowledge. Never of the future, but of the present and the past. A single touch, rough fingers brushing over the lamp, was all it took for her to know anyone who wished to ask her a question. Really, it was almost unfair how much she learned of him, and in but an instant at that. And for once, it wasn't the old man who released her. No, this was someone new. Knowledge flooded her mind where there had been none before. Naruto Uzumaki, a ninja displaced from space and time. Warrior, savior, hero, accidentally cast adrift fro his world. A simple soul, yet also a wounded one, tarnished by pain and distress. More knowledge came and she welcomed, poring over it like a good book. In the blink of an eye she knew him and his deeds, past and present. This boy was a bringer of miracles, breaker of fate, destroyer of destiny. He held two fragments of a divinity within him, one in his right hand and another sealed in his stomach. His touch nourished her. Then something unexpected happened. Jin blinked in her prison, blue eyes widening as she felt a fresh surge of power enter the relic that housed her currently incorporeal form. One of her questions was restored to her. The last of the Trinity used by Raven Branwen so long ago was now available once more. Well. This was new. This was unexpected. This was something she hadn't been able to predict. Here was a miracle, one that might never come again. Did it have something to do with the fragments within him? Had he unknowingly recharged the relic? She knew not. The prospect excited her. Jin. Her new owner boomed. I summon you. She was all too happy to manifest in response to this curious development. Wonderful. Raising her arms over her head, she stretched languidly, uncaring of those below her. For gawped at her. The fifth already knew her. Truly she never grew tired of their reactions. She took her time stretching, savoring their confusion, their exclamations, their surprise. What was wrong with that? A girl needed her entertainment. Hello, Naruto Uzumaki. Her summoner blinked, taken aback. How do you know my name? It is my nature to know things. I am Jin, a being created by the god of light to aid humanity in its pursuit of knowledge. She turned her head to regard them with a curious expression. I have been graced with the ability to answer 3 questions every 100 years. When none dared interrupt, so too did she dare to continue. You're in luck, as I'm still able to answer 3 questions this era. Her gaze fixed on the blonde one, the stubborn youth even now regarding her with wide eyes. Count yourselves lucky. There were but 2 before one of you touched the lamp. The little quintet before her shared a glance among themselves. 3, the spring maiden muttered. How is that possible? I already used one. It hasn't been 100 years. I do not know. And she reveled in the unknown. Do be careful lest I take that as a question. She would not, of course. This was far too interesting to be spoilt with a big of mischief. Ask, and so long as it does not pertain of the future, I will do my best to answer you. Naruto's mouth opened. She suspected the question that would come. Just as she knew the answer. Jin felt her lips move of her own accord. If you seek a way home, Shinobi, you shall not find it. The way is shut. The die is cast. You cannot return. Naruto recoiled, face gone ashen. Jin frowned, a rare knot of displeasure souring her curiosity. In answering questions she held a conduit to the gods, and the wealth of knowledge they possessed. But that conduit ran both ways. They had never deigned to speak through her before. Even as she reached for their presence, it retreated, leaving her alone once more. Had this wayward warrior caught their eye as well? Were they still watching the world of Remnant? Even now a curious question. That one she did not have the answer to. I am sorry, she murmured. But take heart. 3 questions yet remain, for you have yet to speak one. Amber elbowed Naruto. Jin focused on her. She knew this one too, just as she knew the spring maiden, as she knew all who had touched the lamp. Her fingers had brushed it before Naruto had called upon her. Always so curious, these mortals. Ignorance was bliss. Did they not realize ignorance was bliss? What she would not give to discard this endless knowledge. What is Ashbin hiding from us? Now that she could answer. He had hidden much indeed. More than they knew. But showing, as they say, was better than telling. And a picture was worth 1,000 words. Once upon a time, there was a lonely girl trapped in a tower. His eyes were damp. It wasn't Jin's knowledge nor the reality of Ozma and Salem that hurt Naruto. It was truth. He didn't fear the gods or even the understanding that they existed. No, I was something else entirely. He couldn't return. His world was lost to him. Alive, perhaps, but lost nonetheless. Jin's words had rang with truth, and he didn't sense a lie in them. Nor did he hate Ashbin for what he'd done. If anything, he pitied the man. He'd made a mistake. They were alike in that regard. Well, Kurama groaned. That's a thing. It's Kagaya all over again. The news wounded Naruto, but it didn't destroy him. He didn't let it. It threatened to shatter the others, however. Sit. Crow swore softly. Salem's immortal. Ithis, what the hell? Why didn't he tell us? Why didn't he tell Summer? If he had. Raven Seal cat her tongue. Now do you understand this is why Ashbin can't be trusted? Why Salem can't be fought? Amber clutched her head in her hands. She really can't be beaten. Why are we even fighting? Vernal tucked her head between her knees with a whimper, terror writ across her face. Oddly enough, that set him off. Enough. His voice shook the vault, silencing the four of them. Salem can be beaten. He spoke slowly, measuring his words with great care. I've dealt with immortals before. If you can't kill something, you seal it. You lock it away. Bury it deep. If that doesn't work, you launch it into space. When no one challenged him, he slapped a fist into an open palm. Just calm down. We can do this. Brisk steps carried him to Vernal's side. He patted her head and the younger girl latched onto him with a wordless whimper. We just beat her pawns into the ground. That says something. You're right. Crow released a heavy breath. Maybe we can't beat her. But we can well beat her pawns. Oi. Naruto slapped his back. Amber and I did the fighting, thank you very much. Crow returned it. Ah, come on. We were only gone for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is an eternity in a fight, bird brain. That got him an elbow. Brat. Naruto grinned back and just like that, the levity between them was restored. Drunken birdie. Hey. Amber looked to him with something resembling hope. Do you know how to seal her? Well, I've been taught a little when it comes to scrolls, but I can well learn. Naruto folded both arms before her chest. Can't be that strong. Bitter laughter tumbled past Raven's lips. You're being naive. Who says sealing will stop her? Who says it won't? He butted his head against hers. We won't know till we try. And maybe she didn't have to be sealed. Salem seemed as much a victim in this as Ashbin. Their feud had all the hallmarks of a bad divorce and Remnant their custody battle. Maybe somebody needed to lock those two in a closet until they made up. Bit of a far-fetched solution, that, but it wasn't one he could bring himself to dismiss. He talked down his enemies before. Salem was probably right up there with the worst, yet he couldn't bring himself to discard the chance that she might see sense. If anything, the real villains were the gods. And you want to fight them, of course you do. Naruto rolled his eyes. Hush. You're starting to sound like Raven. 2 questions remain. Jin atoned above them. Speak them now if you please. Naruto felt this brow furrow. What did he want to ask? Jin had given him a freebie in regards to his world, and she'd already told them about Ashbin. What more was there to know? She couldn't predict the future. Even if she could, he wasn't sure he wanted her to. The future was best left unknown. Still, he could ask any number of things. Did he dare? A thought occurred to him, then. Once we're done, you'll go back into the relic, won't you? That is knowledge I can give freely. Her head bobbed. Yes. I will fall back into slumber until the next CYCL. Ashbin was a prisoner of the gods. So too was Salem. Each shackled into a CYCL that they couldn't break. By that very logic, wasn't Jin the same forced to spend eternity locked in a lamp, with only a brief respite to answer questions? Then back in the relic she went to wait another 100 years. Rinse and repeat. Over. And over. Over again. His heart went out to her. That was no way to live. No, it wasn't living at all. Anyone else would have gone mad. Jin had been downright pleasant to them. And her goodwill would go forgotten. He wasn't sure he'd be sane after enduring that kind of isolation. No, that didn't sound fair to her at all. Vernal whimpered against his side. Can we go home now? Home. Just hearing the word made Naruto twitch. Remnant was his home now. Maybe it wasn't his to protect, but he wouldn't leave it to burn either. If he couldn't find a way back, then he may as well get comfortable here. And he wasn't the sort to ignore injustice like this when he saw it. Steel hardened in his heart. Cobalt blue eyes rose to regard Jin's still hovering form. Crow saw the steely gleam in his gaze before the others. Kid, whatever you're thinking, didn't do it? Raven realized it a moment. I say go for it. Can't hurt and it might screw Salem. Amber's expression was a study of contrast. Are you sure about this? Kurama whistled low and deep. You sly dog. I like it. Naruto inhaled. Exhaled. Spoke. How do I free you? Her lips parted, forming a small, perfect oval. Is that to be your second question? He stood his ground. Yes. As he looked on, Jin's expression changed. Her eyes widened. Shock flitted across her face, followed by fear. Then something else entirely. It was a small, subtle thing, but he picked up on it instantly. Her gaze narrowed, regarding him with a strange lidded look. Jin tilted her head just so, bright blue eyes flicking up and down the length of him. He had the distinct feeling she was reassessing her opinion of him, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. He didn't regret his decision. He refused to. My. She tittered softly. Aren't you an interesting one? I like you. Naruto rang one hat through the messy many of his hair. He had no idea what he'd done. Indeed, how could he? Life was good. Taeyang Xiaolong certainly thought so. At least it was, until his ex-wife and a bunch of strangers toppled out of a portal in his living room. A young girl landed atop them, clad entirely in blue. She blinked back at him innocently. "Hello," she chirruped. "I'm Jin. Nice to meet you." Taeyang set his book down. What the actual hell? There are 3 things all wise men fear: the sea and storm, a night with no moon, and the anger of a gentle man.